recording, so I'm going to just start it right here. Please do me a favor and pay attention to, there will be assignments. Again, they're not graded assignments, but there will be assignments asking you to bring in your most current working files for your final project. Again, this is not necessarily, I'm not looking for finished art in the beginning. The only time you need to be bringing in finished art is going to be the very last class. Hopefully I don't have to log in. That would be a faint false hope. So at any rate, please pay attention to those things and bring in whatever it is you can. So I've already made this announcement once before. I'm going to do it again, but let me get to our website first. All right, so this is our week 9 right here. So, yep, next week is going to be the first time to do this. I need you to bring in working files from your final project next week. However, that doesn't mean that you have to have anything that you've actually shot or any of that kind of stuff. It can be other pictures. This is the kind of work I'm thinking about doing. Again, I'm just trying to get some visual content so that we can have a conversation about what it is you really are planning on doing for your final project. If you have stuff that you're already working on, that's great. If you don't worry about that. If you are still on the fence about what you're trying to do, what you think you might want to do, bring in options. Bring in, say, okay, well, I either want to do this, this, or this. I mean, whatever that is. I just want to start this process here in this room, and it'll happen for the rest of the classes until the final when you actually show the work. Is that all right? We don't spend hours going over this stuff. It's really pretty brief and pretty quick. So it's just a way to get feedback from your class members, from me, all that kind of stuff. Are we good on this part? All right, so just pay attention to those dates. I'm not going to look at them again. Okay. Are you doing what? Oh, that's right. We get screwed out of class next week. No, we're not having class next week. Yay, I get to catch up on my grading. I know, and yay, you guys get to vote. That's why we're not having class next week. So I would never, ever presume to tell you who to vote for, but I would beg you, please to vote. Okay, so this will actually even be better because there's an assignment that comes out of today for you to actually do a couple of sets of pictures that will actually be the beginning of your own work in this class. The first time you're not working on one of my files or one of the files that I give you, but you're actually generating your own work. So this will be nice because it'll give you 2 weeks to actually do it. It's not that involved, so don't get flipped out about it. Okay, so today we're going to start with compositing. And the first question that I would ask you, it's the challenge that we have when we're actually doing compositing, is you're taking 2 images and you're putting them together, or more images. It can be a gazillion images. It doesn't have to be just 2 images. So in that putting together, what about those 2 images has to match in order for your composite to be believable? So I'm going to talk today about believable composites, not stuff that you are definitely trying to make look artificially stuck together, right? So this is not like you're going in with a pair of scissors, cutting out a photo print and gluing it onto something else with a real obvious indication that this is not meant to fit together, that's not meant to be. So again, what I'm looking for, what the conversation I want to have is about believable composites. So let's just say, and again, it can be anything. I'm just going to say I've got a figure and I'm putting it into a background, that's all. What about those 2 images has to match if it's to be a believable composite? Anyone? Lighting would be the first, a very obvious one, right? Can we go a little bit deeper in lighting? Color and, well, that would be lighting, but yes, direction of light, lighting, color. Oh, perspective is a big one. That's not really lighting, but what I would put under lighting as well is exposure, right? Those things all need to actually match. Then you bring up perspective, which is a great one because that's where we're starting today. And it's the one that most people struggle with. You will, if you haven't dealt with, anybody in here like really accomplished painter or sketch artist or drawer, that kind of stuff? A little bit. Well, you have had to deal with perspective in all of that kind of work, but most of us as photographers simply accept the perspective that we have. Now, we can make choices about perspective. I can get down really low on the ground and shoot up. I can get up on top of a building and shoot down. I mean, we can exploit and play with perspective, but the idea that you need to be cognizant of perspective when you are putting images together becomes an incredible challenge for doing really good compositing work. What else? Yes? Shadows? Shadows would go back to lighting and matching, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. If you have directions of a background shadow going one way and a figure going the opposite way, it's a dead giveaway what you're doing, right? Okay, I'm going to give you my list really quickly. You should probably think about writing this down. So, because they're going to be all things that we are going to actually spend time with in doing your perspective work. In your compositing work. So, I'll wait. Okay, so this is just my list in no necessarily particular order, but the first is going to be lighting direction, exposure. Sorry, I'll wait. No, I'll wait. Elements that your composites need to match in some. I realize that's a really horrible sentence structure. I'm sorry, what? We'd like an acronym for it, right? Like, okay, you need the LACCSSSP to match. And so, yeah, elements that for compositing that need to match. That's what this is all about. Okay, so we're going to start again with lighting direction, exposure, contrast, color, saturation, shadows, scale, and perspective. Now, this kind of covers the big main guys in all of this. They'll sort of touch on most of it. Does that mean it's a completely exhaustive list and that it'll cover every single compositing situation that you go for? It'll cover 99.9% of them, but there may be some rogue element out there that would be slightly different. But at any rate, this is going to cover the heavies. So we are going to start with perspective in this, just because most of you understand all the other elements in here. Most of you understand exposure. Actually, all of you. I know all of you do. You understand exposure, and you understand contrast, and you understand all of those issues. I know you get that part. But perspective is the tricky one. And I'm not even really going to bother trying to have a back and forth about what perspective really is. We're going to go through an exercise about perspective to help give you, hopefully, the tool set that you're going to need to then develop the kind of compositing that, again, that you can pass off as believable. All right, so to do that, we are going to start with our Session 9 folder. So it's working files inside the Session 9 that you guys have had since week 1. So again, I'm going to go to my Session 9. Inside your folder for Session 9, there should be another folder called Perspective. Can everybody find that folder? So it's, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, week 9, Session 9. And inside that, there is a folder called Perspective. Johnny, tell me when you're there. You good? Okay. Inside of that, there's a set of files. There's a folder in here. There's a couple things that are in here. The one I want you to open is the one that's at the very top, the one that is, or at least in my case, because I do sort by name and column view, is the 01-01 Perspective. If you could double click and open this up. So in the compositing work that we are going to do from this point on, I use files from the people that I think are online people who are teaching elements about Photoshop and about just about photography in general, that kind of stuff. And I give credit where credit is due. So this is a file from a guy by the name of Jesus Ramirez. If you want my top 3 I will actually show you my top 3 because one of them's name I can't ever pronounce. So, so the file that we're working on today comes from, it's a file that, it was a working file for an editorial, not for an editorial, for a package about perspective that I got actually from Jesus Ramirez, bought from Jesus Ramirez. This is who he is. This is his Photoshop training channel. This is one of the 3 people that I respect and who I will go to actually look at stuff. So if there's Photoshop questions that you guys have or things that you don't understand or that kind of stuff, the other 2 people as well that I'm going to show you are really good resources. They're trusted resources. There's a lot of down and dirty crap out there. That's not what this is. Jesus Ramirez has actually been hired by Adobe to do a bunch of content work for them. So anyway, the file that we're going to work on is his file. I strongly suggest you guys subscribe to this guy's channel. You'd be surprised at how much information. He's really good. That's, I guess, all I'm going to say in here. The next one that I'm going to go to is Piximperfect. And this guy for me always goes by the name of Amish. That's just what I call him, right? But anyway, this is his channel. And again, if you look at Amish Dinda, of all the people that I'm going to show you, he is, in my opinion, probably the #1 candidate in this guy. He is just really smart. He knows his stuff really well. He has an exhaustive collection of videos. He's easy to watch. He's smart. He's candid, the whole 9 yards. We will work on one of his files, I think, next week. We might get to it this week, but I doubt it. I think we'll get to it next week, yes. I keep saying next week. Just count next week as being 2 weeks from now. Okay, yeah. Believe me, I'm not going to show up next week if no one else is here. So yeah, I get that part. And then the last one is Phlearn. Phlearn. Yeah, Aaron Nace at Phlearn. Another good, incredibly strong, trusted source to actually go to. You can see he's got 911 videos. He is actually a part of the Adobe. Well, I don't know what the exact relationship is, but there are now, you guys know what rich tools are? So rich tools, so if you, right now, the way most of it is set up, if you hover over a tool in Photoshop, you'll get a small little yellow pop-out that describes what the tool is and it'll give you a shortcut for it. There's also, if you have what they call rich tool tips enabled, you'll get a small video of actually how to use the tool. Aaron doesn't do all of them, but Aaron actually does a number of them. So, I mean, that's how tight he is with Adobe. They're actually using, he's developing content for Adobe that's actually a part of Photoshop. So anyway, those 3 guys are, that's who I go to and who I look at, looking for tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the reason I point all of this out is that I believe it vehemently in giving credit where credit is due. We are using the images of theirs that we are using in an educational context, which means that copyright infringement does not necessarily apply to us because this is being done in an educational context. But even if that were not the case, I would still give a shout out to them and for their work and the fact that we're using their images. So the image that we're going to start that is from Jesus Ramirez is one that he built. So this was one that, this is his exercise, an exercise of his on perspective. And so what you got here, it's interesting, this doesn't happen in Photoshop anymore. But Photoshop, up until probably 2 or 3 years ago, supported 3D. They actually had a 3D working environment inside of Photoshop. So you could do 3D lighting, you could do 3D objects in Photoshop. You could do all sorts of things in there. They got rid of that. The reason they got rid of it was the engine that actually is on most OSs specifically the Macintosh one, I think was the biggest problem one, no longer supported the 3D engine that Adobe was using. So Adobe farmed it out to another program called, does anybody do any 3D work in any of the Adobe suite? I think it's called, it begins with an S. It's like Scalar or Scanner. I forget what it is. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, the latest beta of Photoshop has actually started to reintroduce 3D. So they are bringing a 3D working space back into Photoshop just for what it's worth. Jesus Ramirez does a ton of work in 3D. So he built all of this. He built the spaces in this. He built the models in this. He built all of this. So again, shout out to him. Please do me a favor, subscribe to his channel, ring the bell, do all the shit that you're supposed to do so that he at least feels like I'm giving something back to him. Okay. So with that being said, this is a three-dimensional space, or it's an illusion of three-dimensional space. And basically what you can see is we've got a ground plane, so that's the checkerboard or the graph line that's actually on the bottom. You can ignore the red line and the other blue line. And then a horizon line, which is where the sky actually meets the ground. That's what we're looking at right here. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, just to get you sort of familiar with the beginning of all of this. So if you take a look on your layers palette, you'll actually see that there's a group of colored folders in the layers, so it's layer groups. The one I want you to start with is the one that's in the flagged by the orange group. So if you click on the eyeball to turn this part on, and then click on the drop-down menu to open it up, then, oh, I take that back. Hang on. I am not going to go there. I'm going to collapse that guy as well. I'm not going to go there. I want to go to the one underneath it, the diagram ones, the red ones. So ignore the orange box. If you clicked on it, unclick on it because there's enough transparency in here that all of this stuff will start stacking up on each other, and I don't want that to happen. So unclick the orange group, click on the red group, and click on the little triangle to open it up. Once you get it opened up, the first indent layer in is yet a subgroup right now called 1-point perspective. You need to click on the eyeball to actually turn that on, and you should see 3 cubes that look like this that are floating in your space. Has everybody got that? Okay, like all of our classes, I'm not going to keep doing a shout out. Does everybody have this kind of stuff? If you get lost or something, you click on something and it's not what you expect or that's wrong, stop me right there. This one is really important to get through all of the things that we're going to look at in here. And I want this on your screen with you screwing around with this stuff. Charles. I'm sorry? Are you good? All right. Hallelujah. Okay, so all of these cubes right here, this is now we're going to talk about single point perspective, 1-point perspective. These are all in perspective. And what we mean by this is that if you come down to start to scroll down because we've turned on all of the cubes. So I'm scrolling down in this red set and keep going down till you see a group that's called a vanishing point. I want you to click on that. And what you will see is there is a series of lines that are coming off of these cubes. So it's the green lines that I'm actually talking about. So all they have done is they've like laid a ruler down on this line of the cube. I'm pointing to this top line right here and just running that line all the way back. You can ignore where it actually lands for just a second. We'll talk about why it's landing here. But that's what's happening on all of these lines. Does this make sense to everybody, what those green lines are and how they were created? And the same thing goes true for the one that's actually floating up in space. Those lines are coming out off of this. These are actually all converging on one single point called the vanishing point. And that vanishing point, by definition, has to be on the horizon line. So that's what we're actually looking at. So you can see the converging lines are coming off of all of these. They are all converging on one single point, although that doesn't have to happen. You can have a vanishing line running anywhere. You can have different vanishing points, but they will all land on this horizon. Does that make sense to everyone? So if we come down and click on right underneath that vanishing point layer, right underneath it is the horizon line. If you click on that, you can see that these vanishing, the converging lines all converge on a vanishing point. The vanishing point is actually on the horizon line, and all of these guys meet there. That is the definition of being in perspective. So this is something that the Renaissance artists figured out. So if you take a look at the Last Supper, it's one of the most classic examples of a single vanishing point. DaVinci. By the way, there's a DaVinci whole Ken Burns film thing on PBS coming up starting soon, which should be exciting if you're into that kind of thing. Anyway, any questions about this part so far? Relatively simple, relatively straightforward. Okay, if you come up to the top, so I'm coming up now to go where you'll see there's a thing called Free Cube. If you can click on the eyeball that's next to the Free Cube group, you will see that it actually puts another line down. If you then click underneath that, it will give you its converging lines, and also so you can see that the vanishing point doesn't always have to be in the middle of the frame. In the case of our first three cubes, it just happened to be that way. This cube that's on the left side right here is also got a set of converging lines. It also has a vanishing point. The only criteria that has to be met to have it be in perspective is that those converging lines also land on a vanishing point, and that vanishing point also has to be on the horizon line. Does that make sense? Okay, so turn off the vanishing point, turn off the converging lines that are underneath that free cube. Select the free cube layer. So I've just selected this free cube layer. I've turned off the, actually that's not the free cube layer, that's the free cube layer. I've selected this free cube layer. I've turned off the vanishing point, the converging lines and the vanishing point, just because I want you to be able to see what happens without this. And then I want you to hit the V key, which gives you the move tool. That's the very top tool on the toolbar that's got the cross arrow, the north, south, east, west arrows on it. And then you will actually see that your cube is now selected, and I want you to just click on it and lift it up. And it doesn't matter how high you lift it up. I'm just going to actually lift mine up, and that part's off, and I'm going to go ahead. I don't know why I've got a transform dialog around mine. This actually happened to me last time, but nonetheless, if you take a look at this, and I don't have a way to say yes, commit that. I'll just hide it. So when you look at this now, does it look like this floating cube now is in perspective? It is not. It is clearly something that is wrong when you look at it. So this is the best thing that I can tell you about perspective. When you are looking at an image, there's no immediate obvious way to know if something is in perspective until you really start to dissect it. But what will happen is that a lot of times you will be looking at an image and you will say to yourself, there's something not right about this image, and I'm not entirely certain what it is. 9 times out of 10, it is the perspective is off. That is what it is. So you'll see people do something like this, and let's say that there's a ledge up here that would actually support the floating cube. It wouldn't matter, even if the ledge explains why it's not floating in air magically. The perspective is off, and you'll look at it and you'll say, no, something is wrong. If you hit Command Z, it should drop back down, and now look at it again, and don't you feel like this cube is indeed grounded in this space? And it is, because the perspective is correct. Good on this part? All right. You can turn off the very top. We're going to stay in the diagram group, but I want to turn off the diagrams, the 1-point perspective, turn the eyeball off, collapse the group so that we can go to the 2-point perspective, and click on the eyeball next to 2-point perspective, and click on it to actually open up its the subgroup that says 2-point perspective. You end up with 3 cubes that you can actually see here. We do have vanishing points for this, so underneath the 2-point perspective subgroup, click on the eyeball next to the vanishing points, and you can see in this case, you don't have a single vanishing point for these elements. You actually have multiple ones. You have 2. And so what you can imagine, I'm going to take the cube that's right in the middle. What you can imagine this is, to give you some sense that it's not just these abstract geometric shapes, imagine that you're photographing a building and you can see the side of the building and the front of the building. So this would be the side of the building and the front of the building. In that scenario, that object would have 2 vanishing points. Again, the converging lines that come off one are establishing the vanishing point on the right. The other ones that are coming off the other side of it give you the vanishing point, the converging lines that establish a vanishing point at the left. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on here? So that's basically a 2-point vanishing line here as well. If you click on the horizon line again, you can actually see that, yes, indeed, this is happening here. But what I want you to take away from this, because we're going to look at this again here, is that also about perspective. If we look at the cube on the bottom, can you see the bottom of that cube? No, you cannot. If you look at the top cube, the one that's up in that's floating up, the most top one up in space, can you see the top of that cube? No, you cannot. This is also about perspective. If you've got an element that is above the horizon line, you cannot see the top of that element, that top plane. If you have one that is below, you cannot see the bottom plane. This part matters. If you have one that's right in the middle, you don't see either the bottom or the top. And that's what you're seeing happen right here. Does that make sense to everybody, what's going on here? All right, good. You can then come up and turn off the eyeball for the 2-point perspective, and you can collapse that whole group, that subgroup. And then we're going to go to 3-point perspective. So go ahead and click on 3-point perspective. So in this case, people always look at this and go, well, what the fuck is that? You know, how could that possibly be? What's happening here is just imagine that this is like, I don't know, this is a concrete block that's being suspended from a crane, and this is what it looks like, right? You could add the lines for the crane. That wouldn't change this notion of perspective at all. It would just explain how this thing is floating in the middle of the air. So if we then turn on it, go ahead and open up the 3-point perspective subgroup, and then again, click on its vanishing lines to turn that on. You can see that in this case too, I have the original 2-point perspectives for the right and left side, but I've also got a set of converging lines that are coming off of the bottom part of this. So what ends up happening in a 3-point perspective is that 2 of the vanishing points will always land on your horizon line. One of them will simply be floating in space. Now, in this case, if you take a look at this image, you say to yourself, well, that means it's always up in the air. It does not mean it's always up in the air. If you come up to your image menu, up to the image menu, the very top one, and come down to image rotation, and say you want to flip this canvas vertically, it will flip around. And so now imagine that what was our sky is now the ground, and what is now the grid lines that were the ground is now the sky. So what would this image be? So now imagine you are in a helicopter flying over the top of a building, and this is the surface of the building that you're looking at. Again, 2 sets of your converging lines would establish 2 vanishing points on the horizon line, and a third one would not be hanging up in the middle of the air. It would be hanging down somewhere in the middle of the ground. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? All right, you can hit Command Z to undo that so that it flips back around the way it's supposed to be. And then I'm going to turn off the 3-point perspective group and collapse it. And the next one I'm going to go to is the top to bottom boxes. It's the last in the red groups. So if you'll click on that eyeball, and you can actually see there are now 5 boxes. And the issue that we were talking about before, about what can you see of any given element depending on where it is in perspective in your scene. So you can see that the box that's on the very bottom, if the others didn't exist, you would be able to see more of its top surface because it is lower onto the ground, where it's actually on the ground, than any of the boxes that are above it. As you go to the next box up in the stack, you see less of the top. You still don't see any of the bottom in any of these. If you go to the next one up, the third one up, oh, by the way, there's 6 of these, not 5. The next one up, you see just a very sliver of the very top. And again, if there was a box like the one we showed before that was perfectly centered on this horizon line, you wouldn't see any of the top or the bottom. But in this case, you see just a fraction of the top and none of the bottom. But then when we go to the next box up that is actually above the horizon line, you start to see the bottom of the box and not the top. And as you continue to go higher, you see more of the bottom, and you never see any more of the top. But as you continue to go higher and higher and higher, you see more of the bottom and more of the bottom and more of the bottom. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, I don't think there's any vanishing lines in here, but I'm going to go ahead and open this subgroup up. No, there are no vanishing lines in here, but there is one last image in here, and it's of a car. If you can click on the eyeball for the car and take a look at this image right now and say to yourself, is this in perspective? Is it? How do you know? Because what? Exactly. I would be able to see part of it, right? And then what can you tell me about the top of the car? I see little of it, but I see some of it, right? I certainly see more of it than the top of the car. I mean, than the bottom of the car, right? Wow, this is going to be that kind of conversation all week, this whole class, right? Okay, so again, select the car layer to make it active. So I've just clicked on the layer to make the whole thing active. Again, we're going to move this. So I'm going to hit the V key. This is really disturbing to me now. I shouldn't be getting these bounding boxes every time I hit the V key to actually move this. Let's try something else here. I'm going to undo that and undo that again. Don't worry, I'll just hide it. So I do have the move tool on this. I'm going to click on the car and I'm going to just start to drag it straight down, and I want you to bring it down to the point that you feel like it is indeed truly grounded in this scene. And I'm going to leave mine right about here. Why? Because in many ways this matches the same amount of the top box that's right here. And does this not now look like this is in perspective? Again, look at the difference. This is where it was, grounded. Fake, grounded. Real, real, not real. Does that make sense? Again, this is that thing that I told you about. People do this shit all the time. They don't think about it. They'll just stick something in space and they want it to be convenient where they stick it, and so that's where it is, and there you go. But it's wrong. And again, the more you work with this, the more you will be able to spot this. So again, the car down here actually makes complete sense. Make sense to you? Okay. You can turn off the eyeball on the entire red group. So up to where it says diagrams, click on the red eyeball. You can collapse everybody in here, and we're going to go to the next one down, the green group called people. Don't worry, guys. We're going to do more breaks during this class, I hope, because it can be a lot. Anyway, so the green group. So everything's off now. The green group that has people next to it. If you click on that and then go ahead and open up the group, there's more clues about perspective that we need to talk about. So this is actually a 3D figure that Jesus Ramirez created to be in his space. Again, he's a really good 3D artist. I wish I had his skill when it comes to that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, really the reason I wish I had his skill is that to be able to use a 3D space to generate your shadows would be a godsend. And I can never get that to work. So anyway, for what it's worth. Okay, so we have a guy. And if you take a look at the horizon line where it is bisecting the guy, you can see it is right through the middle of his, what's the part of your arm above your elbow, below your shoulder? The bicep. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. This is running right through the middle of his bicep, right? So if you turn on open up the people group, go all the way to the bottom of the group. All the men are at the bottom, as they probably should be. And you will see that there's a man number 1 that's actually visible. I want you to click on leave him visible. I just want you to click on the eyeball for man number 2. And you can actually see that this guy is smaller, and it's because he is further away from the camera, but look where the horizon line is bisecting him. Did you catch that word? Yeah. Bisecting the bicep, right? I mean, it's in the exact same spot. To have figures, now the assumption here is that it's a twin of this guy. It's exactly the same height. If he was a different height, if one guy was 5'6" and the other guy was 6'6", this would not be happening, but we're just assuming that these are exactly the same people. To have them in perspective, that horizon line bisects them in exactly the same spot, no matter how far back in space you go. This is another problem a lot of people have, is that they will continue to push their compositing figures back in space, and eventually they go up above the horizon line, or the horizon line no longer bisects them at the same spot, and that again, it's an immediate clue that this is out of perspective. If you go to the next one up, there's a man number 3. You can see there's a little guy all the way in the very background, but the horizon line is still bisecting him in exactly the same spot. That will never change. No matter how far we push him back there, that will never change if he is in perspective. Are we good on that part? All right, go to the next one up. It's a guy squatting down. Now, this is the same man who's actually squatted down on the ground. But in this case, the horizon line is not bisecting his biceps. Wow, I'm going to really get in trouble with this. Bisecting biceps. It's not going to cut through that arm part the way it is because he's no longer 6 feet tall. He's now crouched down. He's 3 feet tall. However, his relationship to the horizon line remains consistent if we push him back into space. So go up to the next squatting man, number 2, and you can see that the relationship between the horizon line and the person is the same. So if we said, okay, this guy, the space above this guy is about the same as his height, then again, even though he's smaller, that amount of distance between him and the back and the horizon line would indeed be smaller, but it would be proportionately exactly the same as the figure that was in the foreground. Are we good on this? And then finally, there's a squat number 3 guy. You can put him on as well. And you can see much further back in space, but again, proportionately speaking, there is still that same amount of space between his back and that horizon line, and that will never change no matter how far we push him back. He has got to have a proportionate amount of that space above his back but below the horizon line in order for him to be in perspective. Whew! Okay, keep going up. We're going to bring a woman into this group right here. So the woman right now has been added to this. She is in perspective, but you can see that this is now bisecting almost not quite the top of her shoulder, but what you would really call her shoulder socket. That's where it is. It is a different space than the guy that she's very next to, but that's only because she's shorter, right? So she is in perspective relative to all the other figures that we've got in here, but where the horizon line interacts with her is going to be unique to her, not to the other figures. However, if you actually then click on a woman number 2, you will see that even though she's much further back in space, that horizon line bisects her in the exact same spot. And this will be true forever. So these end up being really valuable marker points that we can leverage when we're actually trying to put people in perspective in our compositions. Are we good on this part? All right. One more thing to click on. It's the woman on the box. So now you can see that in this case, this woman is in perspective, but she's taller than the guy. She's no longer, now the horizon line is bisecting her waist. Why? Yeah, because she's standing on a 3-foot box. So this woman is no longer, 5'9". She has now got a 3-foot box she's standing on. She's now 9'9", right? 8'9", whatever the math is. Does that make sense to what's going on here? Okay. So we've gone through, you can collapse the people group now and you can turn its eyeball off. So now we're going to start talking about stuff in real time, real things in here. So the purple group is the next one down, called samples. If you can click this on to turn it on, you can go ahead and open this thing up. Is this correct? It's just, this is what I was trying to get you guys to understand. When you look at this, you think to yourself, there's something is just not right about this. Now, a lot of people would argue part of it is the exposure, part of it is color, part of it is, there are other clues that are happening here, but that gut feeling that there's something wrong is because this person is completely out of perspective to the scene. So to figure this out, come down to the grouping that's down here. I want you to open up the man group. So if you click on it to open it up, you'll actually see that there's a copy of a guy in here. He's got a layer mask on him, and then he's also got a shadow layer on here as well. I want to temporarily turn off the shadow, I want to turn off the mask. So the layer mask that is actually knocking the guy out, if you hover over that mask, hold down the shift key and click, it actually goes away. And this is the original scene. This is how the original photograph of this was taken. Can you tell me where the horizon line of this is? Yeah, it's right above his knees, right? You can see it's where the sky actually meets the ground. Now, in this case, it's very easy to determine that. In some images, it's very challenging to determine that. We will deal with those issues later. But this one is a very obvious move here, right? You can see, okay, just above his knees is where the horizon line is. But now if you hold down the shift key again and click on the big X that's on that mask and it goes off, where's the horizon line in this image? It's above his head. That is a mismatch of perspective. We need to fix that part. So the easiest way to fix it is to come down and select the beach. So I'm going to select the layer that says beach. I'm going to come over onto my image now. And again, I'm not going to hit the V key again because it keeps giving me that bounding box. I'm hoping that it doesn't do this if I come in on this right now. But anyway, I'm going to click on the beach. There's a lot more beach above. There's a lot more of this image above it. So it's simply click on the beach and drag this down until the horizon of the beach is right above his knees and let go. Does this now seem more believable? Do your Command Z back and forth and you can see not in perspective, in perspective, not in perspective, in perspective. This is the challenge that you guys have when you're doing your compositing. Is this working for everyone? Right? So when you are trying to bring elements that are in perspective, their horizon lines need to match. If they do, you will be in perspective. If they don't, you will not be in perspective. We good on this part? That is the single most important takeaway from perspective, is this challenge to get matching horizon lines. Now, there again are strategies that we will have to develop horizon lines in different places. We will look at those in a little bit. Any questions about this so far? Okay, turn off the eyeball for the beach, and right underneath it there's the one that's called city. Turn this one on. So if you turn this one on, is this in perspective? Yes, it is. The horizon line of the city is sitting right above the line. Again, this line right here. Look at my screen. I'll show you really quickly. I'm going to drag a line down here. The horizon where the sky is meeting the ground is on a line that's right above his knees, which is exactly the way it was in the lake picture of the guy. That horizon line was right above his knees. So he is in perspective here. Does that make sense? All right, so the next thing we're doing here is critical. This is why we set up some of the things that we set up in Photoshop in preferences in day one. How do you then transform in perspective? That's what we need to do right now. I want to make this guy closer to the camera. I want to make him further away. I want to make him floating in the air like he's Superman or something. I'm going to go for closer to the camera first, right? But I cannot just grab the guy and sort of like move him around and that kind of stuff. I need to change his scale, but I also need to keep him anchored to this scene where the area above his knees matches the horizon line of the city. I need to be able to do that all in one stroke, right? So this is how you do it. Please do this with me because this is something you're going to use in all of our work going forward here. It's a little bit tricky. There's some keyboard combination stuff that we're going to work with, but I'm going to show you basically how this works. So make sure that the guy is selected. So come up to the guy layer. Make sure that that layer is selective and active. So again, he's anchored to, his mask is anchored to him. So no matter what we do to him, he will remain knocked out. So then I'm going to hit Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. And what you can see right now is that we have an anchor point that's sitting right in the middle of the guy right here. And then we've got these control handles that are all around here. I can't see all of the control handles, which is a problem for me. So I'm going to hit the circle up at the top that's got the slash through it to get rid of this set of transform handles. Then I'm going to hit the F key once to go to my paste board. And now, in this case, it didn't actually undo that part, but, oh God. Okay, so I've got, and then hit Command T again. And this is, you should be able to see all your control handles now and also have that anchor point. Okay, if you do not have the anchor point, that's this thing right in the middle. It's like right on his upper thigh. If you do not have this anchor point up at the options bar all the way to the left, right under the word Photoshop, there's a little place where you can put a check mark and it'll give you, there's an icon next to it. This is supposed to be telling you this is showing the anchor point. If you uncheck this, the anchor point's still there, you just can't see it. Lily, are you okay over there? No. Then stop me next time and don't just like... Oh, you're right. Okay, so here's the trick about transforming in perspective. You need to take this anchor point and you need to put it right on the horizon line. So I am going to move mine over to the side. I'm going to drag mine actually way over. Do the same thing with me. I'm going to show you how to move him all over this, but keep him in perspective. So I'm going to just put it somewhere over on the right-hand side. It doesn't matter exactly where you put it. That part doesn't really matter. So at any rate, it's all over on that side, correct? Then you hold down the Shift key and the Option key and grab any control handle. It doesn't really matter which one. I typically grab the ones that where so I'm going to move him. He's actually going to get smaller. I'm going to move him out to the. I'm not going to do them closer to the camera first. I'm going to move him out into space first because it's easier to understand based on all the other examples that we actually just looked at. So I'm going to grab the handle, the bottom handle on the lower side. But again, it wouldn't really matter which one you grab on this. But I'm going to do the lower left-hand handle, and I'm going to start to push him towards the back. And you can see that the horizon line is staying on the top of his knees no matter how far I get him out there. And so when I get him all the way out here, and he's also keeping his ratio. He's not getting distorted. His width and his height are also staying consistent. Did this work for everyone? All right, so this is the guy, and this is how he would be floating out in space. Command Z to undo that. It will simply bring him back in space. I've still got the anchor point that's out on the horizon line. If yours changed, go ahead and put the anchor point back on the horizon line. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to bring him closer to the camera. So again, hold down the Shift key and the Option key, and this time click on, I'm going to do the same point on the lower left-hand side. I'm going to click and drag downward, and you can see it's pulling him back. And a lot of people would say, well, but I can't see the top of his head anymore. It doesn't matter. This is how it would really be if you photographed him. He is in perspective. That horizon line is still bisecting that line right above his knees. And most people don't know that. Most people would have done this. Right now, you would have this. Oh, he's closer to the camera. But look at this. Is that believable? Not for an instant. But is this? Yes. Again, innately we understand, I think our minds, somewhere our subconscious mind, whatever, understands perspective, but trying to articulate it and then see how all of the rules of it work, whatever, it takes work, it takes effort, and that's what we're doing right now. Does this make sense? Okay. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. We are going to do another transform instead. I don't want him going side to side. I want him coming straight back to the camera. If that's the case, move your anchor point so it's right between his legs, but still right on the horizon. Then hover over any of the control handles, hold down the Shift and the Option key both, and click and drag back, and now you're pulling him straight back to the camera. Again, for people who composite, this is a game changer because we are transforming in perspective. He keeps that horizon line, still bisects him where it's supposed to. He gets bigger, which he's also supposed to because we're bringing him closer to the camera. But also the parts that you lose in the top or the bottom that's just collateral damage. That's what it is because this is how it has to be for him to be this close to the camera, yet in perspective. Are we good on this part? Command Z to undo that. If you want to move him over to the other side, I want to move him over to the left of my image, you have two options. You can do this actually either way. You can grab the horizon, the horizontal tool, whatever. I'm going to put it on the other side, so I'm going to now put it on the horizon line of the left of my image. I'm going to grab the control handle on the right bottom of my image now, hold down the shift and the option key, click, and I'm going to push him out to the right side like this. And let's put him right on the edge. Let's just sort of like he's a jumper. We're going to put him right on the edge, like he's actually going to go down, right? So now he has moved to the left somewhat, right? So you can go ahead and commit this transform. So go ahead and click on the check mark up at the very top. I can't apparently get rid of mine visually, so he's the right size now in perspective. You can shift him in this image left to right. You can't move him up and down. If you moved him up and down, his legs would no longer be bisected by that horizon line at the place where it's supposed to be. But again, if you hit the V key to get the move tool and hover over the guy, hold down your shift key before you do this. You can click on the guy and you can drag him. Oh, this is not going to let me do anything here. Sorry guys, I got to restart Photoshop really quick. Say what? Yeah, this could be. We're almost done with this though. I've got one last thing to show you and then we'll actually jump back on it. Say what? Yeah. I haven't been in this much Photoshop hell for years. I did. And I thought it fixed everything, but there's another new problem. I still think part of this is coming from, let me quit. You know what's really funny about that? You say that. Do you know who? Hang on, no, I'm not. That's not the one I want. The samples. Do you know who Julian Costa is? She's like the Photoshop guru. She's worked for Adobe forever. Hang on, let me get this back. Anyway, I did a seminar with her for Adobe. Flies educators out to Adobe for a week and puts us all up and wines and dines us and does all this shit to show us all their new tech. Anyway, and so I was there and I met her. I spent a week with her, and she said, you know, anytime something comes up, you can reach the engineers faster if you just send me the problem first. She goes, because then I'll send it to them. So I've been thinking about reaching out to Juliana about this, but at any rate, yeah. Okay, let me get this guy back again. Hopefully this is where he was. Let me select him. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I am going to put him right on the edge right here. Command Shift Option and drag this in to move him onto the line just a little bit more. Go ahead and accept that transform. And I'm just going to click over here. Fuck me. So no, I'm getting these back. But if you're in your case, you shouldn't be getting the whole transform dialog control handle parts back again. If you simply want to move him left and right, hold down your shift key and click, and you can move him left or right. He stays in perspective. You can do this, the same thing. So you don't have to put the anchor point on the right side or the left side or in the middle or anywhere else. Sometimes it's just easier, it's just faster, you save a step. But you can always move them left to right because they are not getting any closer or any further away from the camera, so their size is not changing, but they're also not going up or down. You can't go up or down because that changes where the horizon line bisects the figure. Does that make sense? So no matter how you want to get there, you can get them in the right spot and still keep them in perspective. Are we good on this part? Okie dokie then. One last thing, I'm going to go Command Z to back to my original. Now in my case, because I have the old undo, I need to do Command Option Z again to bring him back to where he was originally. Anyway, you just need to get the guy kind of close to where he was originally. Last thing we're going to do here is turn off the cityscape and turn on the subway station that's right underneath it. So on the subway station that's right underneath it, that may have taken care of it. So to fix that part, I actually said I wanted to not show the transform controls. I'm hoping that's a case of fixing this, but it does not look like this. This is a problem I've been having all along. I think I'm up due for a preference reset, but anyway. So, in looking at this image, is this in perspective? Let's find out. Turn off the picture of the guy, so just temporarily turn off the eyeball of the guy. We need to, you can leave his shadows. These are the shadows still showing of his feet. How do I determine where the vanishing line and the horizon, where's the vanishing point and where's the horizon line of this image? Is there a way that I can establish that? And there is. Now, different people do this different ways. I use the pen tool to do this because it's temporary, gets rid of it. I'm not adding content to my image, but so that's how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna hit the P key to get the pen tool, and what we need to do is we need to trace at least 2 sets of converging lines. So the first set that I'm going to go after is, see this marble sort of like railing that's on the side right here? That's one converging line. So I'm going to click, look at my image to see where I'm talking about. I'm going to click at the beginning right here, and then I'm going to simply go to the other end, and this is actually not showing me my rubber band, so I got to see that. I'm going to go to my other end, and I'd simply go past. I'm like well into the train. But you need to angle this thing up and down so that it traces the very edge of that marble thing. So that's what I'm doing. My first point was a little bit high, but that's okay. I can eyeball this thing, and I'm going to say this is my first point for my first converging line. Is this working for everyone? And simply click to put a point out on the side. So it doesn't matter that there's this point out here. And then need another converging line, and they're all over the place. I could do the railroad. I could do the railroad tracks. I could do this yellow line that's going back. I'm actually going to do the railroad track. I take it back. I'm going to do the yellow line right here. It's easier to see. So I'm just bringing my pen tool down so that I can start another beginning of my converging line near the front. I'm going to click on that and drag all the way back again, and then again. Move this thing back and forth so that it traces just the edge of that yellow line, and click again. And now you can actually see, you don't need to click any more points. Where these two crossed is right in the back area of that black dark area. That is the vanishing point. That's where these converging lines intersected. Vanishing point has to be on the horizon line. There's no real world scenario where that doesn't happen. So I'm going to go up to my ruler at the top, and I'm simply going to click and drag a guideline down so that it snaps to that intersection of those two right in there, and let go. That is now the horizon line of the train station. Did that make sense to everyone? And again, we could have done a million converging lines. The lights that are in the ceiling are converging lines. The edge of the patio thing up here, that's a converging. All of those, they're all going to converge in the very same spot. So then I'm going to go to my path palette, and you can see this is our work path that we've got going here. I'm simply going to throw that thing away. I don't need the converging lines. They've done their work. I don't need them anymore. I have got my horizon line is right here. Does that make sense? Okay, so then let's go back to our layers palette and turn the guy back on. So he's back on right now. Is he in perspective? No. Where would the horizon line of him be? There's no back there. The horizon line's the horizon line. Where would it fall on him? Where has it fallen in every image that we looked at? Just above his knees. So click on the guy to make him active, grab the move tool, and push him straight up. And say to yourself, is he in perspective now? Yes, he is, but he is also 18, 20 feet tall. Oh, well, so we must be able to actually then transform him in perspective and fix this. So let's hit Command T to get the transform dialog box. Let's drop the anchor point down onto the horizon line, hold down the Shift key and the Option key, grab a lower control handle, and push him back in space. And lo and behold, he doesn't get any shorter. He's still 20 feet tall, no matter how far I push him back. He's tall as the fucking train. Why? This is a case where you cannot get someone in perspective because both of these samples were shot at radically different perspectives. So you're not going to, you'll hear this on the video, but you won't see it. The picture of the guy, if you remember it, the photographer is almost on the ground. They are very low like this. Remember, that horizon line is just above his knees. They're incredibly low on him, right? The picture of the train station, somebody is actually up on a tabletop or a ladder or something looking down to be able to see the entire train. That difference in our captures means that you can never get him in perspective. There are no tools in Photoshop. We can't go in and warp him. We cannot go in and do a perspective change using the image editing, the editing transforms. There's no way to fix this problem. There simply isn't. The only solution to this is to either reshoot the guy or reshoot the train. There is no other way to do this. However, we can try to fake things a little bit. It's still going to be wrong. I don't want to give you the impression that this is going to be correct. It is not. But at least the guy won't be 20 feet tall. So this is how I would go about doing this part right here. I'm going to hit Command-Option-Z to go back through my whole series of things. I know where the horizon line is. I don't even really need that. So anyway, I'm going to bring the guy back. I'm going to hit the circle with the X through it. So this is where the guy, this isn't actually where he originally was. He's a little bit further down. So this is how I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to zoom in on this a little bit. And what I'm really looking for is the door of the train. So then I'm going to select the guy, and I want to get rid of all these lines. So I've got a path line showing, I've got a transform lines that are around this guy showing, I've got a whole bunch of shit showing right here that I don't want to actually have. So I'm going to get rid of all this stuff here. So to do that, hold down your Command key and hit the letter H. The first time you do that, you will get a dialog box that opens up and says, do you want to hide Photoshop or do you want to hide extras? You select hide extras. To hide Photoshop is ridiculously simple. You just go up to the edit menu, drop down here and say hide Photoshop. Nobody needs a keyboard shortcut for that. But to get rid of things that are distracting without getting rid of them, to hide them, so things like guidelines are hidden, but they're still there. If you hit Command H again, they all come right back. If you have a selection going and you hit Command H, the marching ants are hidden, but they're still there. So if you start to paint, it will control that. It is a selection. It'll control where you can paint, where you don't paint. If you hit Command H, the marching ants come back anyway. So I'm just hitting Command H to hide this part. And then I'm going to transform the guy, Command T. And in this case, I'm just going to click on the link between the width and the height to keep his proportion. And then I'm just going to use the scrubby slider over either the width or the height to just make him smaller. And then I'm going to bring him down. And what I'm trying to do is I want to place his foot right on the step up, the threshold of the car door. Does that make sense, where I'm going with here? And then I'm going to continue to make him smaller because he's still too tall. So I'm going to move him back again into this, and I'm going to move him down a little bit more. So when you're on a train, you guys know the experience of a train. Can you see out the windows of the door? Everybody close their eyes. You're riding on the train. There's some drunk behind you. There's some pervert in front of you. But you're just trying your best not to pay attention to anyone. So you're staring out the fucking window as everything is zipping by. Are you having to look down and only see ground? Or can you look up and see all the buildings and all that shit flying by? Because the door windows are up here, not down here. Well, that's where they got to be on this guy. So that's how big he can be in this. So that when he's standing right on the other side of that door, he can actually see out the damn car window. Correct? So he is now scaled very close to where he should be. Could I make him slightly smaller? Well, sure. He could be 5'8", but what if he's 6'8"? So I'm close. That's all I need to know. So I'm going to go ahead and accept this transform, and then I'm simply going to bring him out and drop him straight down as where he would be if you imagine him stepping up onto this threshold. And this is your best solution. At least he is scaled correctly to the train, which is a less obvious, the mismatch in scale, if the guy's 20 feet tall, you're gonna just know that that's a fake. If it's at least scaled right, even though the perspective is wrong, look how bad the perspective is. The horizon line, if I bring it back, is cutting through his shoulders, through his neck. He is totally out of perspective. But hopefully he's back far enough, he's scaled right, and hopefully people aren't going to pay so much attention to what you have just done to not believe your composite. But this is the best you can do. And there is no, just understand this, there is no way of fixing this other than reshooting one of the two. Are we good on this part? So this matters when you guys think about going into doing your shooting. It matters. People who are really good at this stuff, people who make a living out of doing compositing, they keep copious notes about where they are when they actually shoot something. So they're going to go out into the woods. They want to put a figure in the woods, right? So they're going out to shoot. How far is their camera above the ground? Is it a foot above the ground? Is it 2 feet above the ground? Is it 3 feet above the ground? Then you go back into the studio to shoot your background, or you go back in the studio to shoot your figure. Then you have to set your camera at exactly that same height to get this. You also need to use the same lens, the same focal length. All of those things need to match if you want this to all work. Yeah, and you guys thought we were just going to, wow, we've done the knockout. Just throw that shit on another background. We're done. Or you thought, wow, this class has gotten pretty complicated, but now we're on easy street because I'm just dragging shit over on top of it. It gets worse. Not worse. It's a thing. Are there questions about any of this? Okay, so now would be a good time for a break. I'm going to be generous today. I'm going to call it 2:15 instead of 2:14. Make it a hard 10. Be back at 25 after. And I'm going to try to reset all of my preferences. Yeah, I'm just hoping I can get it done before you guys get back. So really quickly, just sort of let you guys know what I did was to reset my preferences. I went to the place where I store a backup copy of them. So in this folder, this folder, I have them for both Macintosh and Windows. I have 2 sets. I've got one for 2023 and one for 2024. And these are, again, just the entire set of preferences that are kept inside the user library for my application. So it's all of this stuff. It used to be you only had to replace one thing in here, but now you've got to replace the entire folder. So I just have a copy of the entire folder. It'll have my custom workspaces. Everything are all in here, so I don't have to go in and cherry pick this stuff. Then I go to my personal library, open up the preference folder. Inside the preference folder, you can see I've got still settings for Photoshop 2021, 2022, 2023. It's this settings folder right here. You take this folder and you throw it away. You grab this folder, and when you drag this down, you'll notice if I don't do anything, it's going to move it from where I'm keeping it, my sort of storage, down here, which will work for fixing it, but then I lose the virgin set. So instead, you hold down the Option key and you'll get that little plus, and you just copy it. It took 2 seconds. I don't want to jinx myself, but apparently it's actually working now. It just made a second copy of it up here. You can see how long that took. So anyway, back into Photoshop now. It appears to be working, but I'm not going to go into Photoshop right now. Right now, I'm going to go into Capture One. Just to have a quick little conversation. Again, I think you have these files. If you have Capture One, you could do it, but we're not going to be spending any time to speak of here, so don't go to this right now. I need to move on and make this as quick as possible. So I'm just going to show this to you really quickly. So I am in Capture One, if I could find where it is, right there. So I'm out in the woods and I'm shooting backgrounds. This was for a coat story that I actually was doing. And I go out in the woods and I'm shooting pictures. And if we take a look at our list right here, this is one of the great tricks that you can do. So I take a person out there to help me, number one, because they can give me all sorts of clues about things. But number two, I have a sense of lighting. So this is a picture of my wife, Debbie. Anyway, we're out in the woods. Can you tell me about the lighting direction on this? Yeah, it's an overcast day. pretty flat light on the top. Light direction is coming straight down. So I have my lighting direction. Can this give me exposure? Well, of course it can. I don't worry about exposure settings on my camera. I don't meter shit, whatever. I use perfect exposure based on this color card, correct? Right? So if I white balance this image, oh, that's color too, and hover over this, you can see I'm at a 240. It's close. I should really be at a 240 to 250. 245 to 250. So I'm maybe a sixth of a stop off, something like that, but I'm really close here. So I've got my exposure. Contrast, I can spot it right here. I can see, I've got a reference image. I can see how contrasty she is. Look at the shadows that are underneath her chin. They're not that deep. Look at the shadows that are underneath her nose. Not that deep. Even the shadows that are underneath her elbows in here, not that deep. So I have a reference for contrast in here. Color, I've got the fucking color card in here. So this is the thing you need to think of. Remember about these color cards, is that what the color card can give you is a perfectly neutral color for any image. I don't care where you take it. Out here in the woods, in the studio, change your lights, sodium lights at night, it does not matter. This card will allow you to get a neutral color balance. So what you do in compositing is that you neutralize all of your elements to a neutral color, put them all together, the color will match because they are all neutral. And then once you reach your overall composite, if you want to color grade it and make it really warm or really cool or really desaturated or really hypersaturated, or all the changes that you want to make, it came together as one cohesive color to begin with. The worst thing you can do is to have a image that's shot outside that's slightly warm and an image that's in the studio that's slightly cold, and bring those two things together and try to match the color. You will hate your life. This color card eliminates all of that. It is a 2-button. You push the button on one, you push the button on the other. They have the exact same color. You put them together, and then you do whatever the hell you want to with them. Make sense? Also, do I have any idea what my shadows are here? Yes, I do. I can see them right under her feet. Also, do I have any idea of scale? Yes. I have got a 5'7" ruler sitting right here. I know exactly what my scale is. Do I have perspective? Yes, I do. I have got all of the things that we said we needed are sitting here in this image as a reference. So I shoot her in this reference, and then I simply ask her to leave, and I shoot this again, and this is the image that I use for my background. Does that make sense to everyone in here? Are we good on this part? Okay, we're going to do this. Oh, last thing I wanted to show you really quickly. Always shoot your backgrounds first. Why? I take that back. That's not a fair thing to say. That's not a fair thing to say. If you're going to combine studio and outdoors, what do you shoot first? But the background could be in either place. That could be either place. That's normally called a background. So you're telling me you couldn't go out and shoot a figure in the woods and knock them out and put them onto a studio background, seamless? Of course you could. So that's why this whole background part. My question is that do you do the stuff in the studio or the stuff that's outside first? Why? Bingo. You cannot control the lighting. The worst thing you can do, I'm telling you right now, you will hate your life if you do this, is to shoot pictures in the studio that have a specific kind of lighting and then go outside to try to match it and realize that, oh my God, I've got this Rembrandt light that's coming from the top right side and I've got to find a place that matches that, but still the scene that I want it to be, right? You may have the perfect scene. Oh, it's this, vision of the underneath the L tracks. It's perfect, but the lighting isn't any remotely close to that and never will be. You cannot go out and radically change the lighting, available light outside. So that's what you shoot first, because it's relatively simple, not completely, but relatively simple to go into the studio and mimic that lighting. You have control in the studio, you don't have control outside. Does that make sense, everyone? Are we going this part? Believe me, you're hearing the voice of experience here. I did an entire shooting of figures in the studio and then had to go out and find backgrounds to match. And it took me, what should have taken me a day, took me a week, at least. And I still was not happy with it. All right. So, but one of the great features that you have if you do it this way as well is I can actually go to the overlay section inside of Capture One, and I am going to drag this image, the figure, and put it into my overlay spot, and then I'm going to turn this on, and you're not going to see anything here because it's actually it's the girl and the girl. But when I go inside the studio, this is now my inside the studio, I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to crank the opacity up. Now I've actually got my background in the studio, and you can see what I've done. I've actually taken sandbags in the studio to line up perfectly with the stones that are actually in the scene, so that when the girl puts her feet down, they are actually in place relative to the elements that were in the background. All of these tricks help your compositing, because all of a sudden you don't have, if you got somebody with their leg up higher because this rock was up higher, you need that to be in your scene that you're actually shooting. And if they're not, good luck. I mean, yes, we're going to get into puppet warping, and you can shorten legs and move legs and tilt legs and all that kind of stuff. But the less you have to do, the better off you'll be. Yes?
I'm just curious if there's a specific reason instead of just
Oh, totally. Number one, it was raining that day. No. Number two, we shot this at Devil's Lake in Wisconsin. Do you know what it costs to take a model up to Devil's Lake in Wisconsin to travel alone? You can't do it in a day, so it's an overnighter. So then you're not only paying to shoot them for the day, but you're also paying for them to stay overnight. And then you got to move the whole show up there. So I'm in a comfortable ass, warm ass studio shooting all these pictures of girl. I can bang the stuff out on green screen. I can do 15 coats. I can do it in 2 hours, 3 hours. Instead of 15 coats on location with a motorhome, a full crew, cost. Yeah, I mean, it's night and day. Yeah, I don't understand why so many people do the shit they still do. I mean, you know, oh, let's take a whole crew and go to Hawaii and shoot with the big surf as our background. It's like, do you know how easy it is to strip that shit together? You know, and how cheap. I mean, again, so that's why. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the technology for background generation, whatever, is it's completely changed radically. There used to be a really old version of that. If you guys ever seen the film 2001: Space Odyssey? All of that's shot on what they call a front projection screen. So there's two kinds of screen that people used to use in the old days. So they used to use a rear projection screen, which was basically like a bed sheet almost. And they would project against the back of it, and it would actually show up, and then they put people in front of it and shoot it. It didn't look that great. And then they got into front projection, which is what Stanley Kubrick uses for that film. And a front projection screen is made up of thousands of tiny little mirrors. And so what they do is they can actually have a transparency that they project on it that's straight onto camera. And because the little mirrors are so more reflective than the figure, the background that they're projecting shows up on the background, but it doesn't show up on the figure, because figures are not anywhere near as reflective. And then they have a completely different set of lighting that they use for the figure, and as long as you keep it off axis and it doesn't hit those mirrors, you don't see the lighting for them coming back. And if you take a look at that film, it's shockingly effective. But now you're absolutely right. Now what they do is they just have a giant LED screen back behind people, and they project anything in the world they want to on it. And they can control everything: exposure, color, tone, perspective, all of that. Of course, that screen probably is $102,000, $300,000. It's not cheap. Yes. I don't worry about the exposure because I use the card to give me perfect exposure. So what I have done, I have a light meter, and I instant light meter that I can use as an instant spot, either one. But light meters and cameras never agree on each other on their ISO. I mean, they never agree. So, but you can go into the studio and you set up a lighting situation, add just a copy light situation, two heads and umbrellas, and just a fixed point, and you put a color card there, and you actually then do a Capture One session. You get the perfect exposure using your color card. So let's just say, for example, it's F8 with an ISO of 100, and then you put your meter in there, and your meter says F11 at ISO 100. Well, that just knows I need to change the ISO setting on my meter to 50 instead of 100, and then my meter and my card are matched, and then I use my meter out in the woods because that actually will give me the same thing that my card would read. That's how I do it. Although, to be honest with you, I take my computer with me everywhere. I shoot tethered everywhere. I do this shit tethered. Yeah, you know, you say that. Everybody says that shit. Let's go back a little bit. You guys have all had a little bit of history of photography, right? So imagine, let's go back to the beginning, right? The guy who's got the cart with the built-in darkroom tent in it, and he's shooting an 11 by 14 view camera, which one person cannot lift or set up. So you've got this gigantic tripod on it. It looks like a small crane. You mount the camera on that. Then you go inside your little darkroom tent with mercury, number one thing, to coat your wet plates. Then you take your wet plate out and put it into your camera, and you do a 45-minute exposure, and then you take your wet plate back into that little darkroom tent and you develop it. Then you hide it so that it doesn't, because there was no fixer back then, and so you can't really afford to let any light hit it, so it's hidden away. And then you pack that fucker all up and you hook it up to your team of horses to haul the shit to the next place. And you are telling me that whipping out a laptop is too much effort? You should be ashamed. There are people who died doing that shit by breathing all the mercury and everything else. I mean, and falling off the cliff with their, I mean, no. No. A laptop is not too much of that's just not too much of an effort. That being said, I pray for the day that you could do it on your phone. That there was just a way. I don't really care about seeing focus check and that kind of stuff on my image. I don't care about composition on my image. I just care about being able to get a legitimate readout on that color card. And if there was an app that just let me shoot that picture, upload it to my phone that would take RAW, and my phone will take RAW. Because again, if it's a JPEG, it's already baked, it doesn't matter. But take a look at that, be able to measure that white patch and say, yep, or I know I need another third of exposure, change everything. You know, we are looking at the $1 million idea right now, right? If we were to develop that app right now, every pro photographer in the world would be knocking down our door. Anyway, any other questions about this? All right, we're gonna do this part really quickly. I'm not gonna go through tons of it. We are going to do this in Photoshop because these have already been shot. So let me just quick capture one. Hope and pray Photoshop is, I don't know, whatever it's going to do, whatever it's going to do to me now. Okay, so let's go back to our session number 9 folder. It's a different set of files that we're going to work with. So let me see what you guys have here. Yeah, we can do it out of the capture, the whole session part. So what I need you to do is, you should have a folder in your session number 9 called Overlay Exercise. Has everybody got that? Yep. We good? Okay, great. If you go inside that overlay exercise, you'll see it is an overlay session. Go inside the overlay session. You will see that there is a capture folder. And inside that capture folder, you will actually see there are 4 raw files. You may have some XMP files in there. That part doesn't matter. What I'm really looking for in here are the trees 013 and the trees 019. Can you find both of those? So I need you to select both at the same time. This part is important because we need to sync our color and exposure. So with trees 13 selected, I'm going to hold down the command key, get trees 14, hit Command O to open it up, or just drag it on top of Photoshop. It should bring them both into Camera Raw. In my case, I've got my thumbnails set on my left-hand side. You may have yours on the bottom edge. If you don't want them on the bottom edge, it's just a preference setting. Just come up to the little wheel here, and you'll find the preference settings for changing that in here. However, I'm going to start with the image that's got the girl with the card in it, so I'm going to zoom in tight on this. Then I'm going to white balance this image to begin with. So I'm going to open up the color panel on the right-hand side. Grab the targeting, well, it's not a targeting adjustment tool. It's the white balance tool, the little eyedropper that's right there. I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on the gray patch that's right next to the red. Then I'm going to hover over the top, and you can see now it was in Capture One reading a 240 for my, roughly for my RGB values. You can see now here in Capture Raw, it's actually reading 250, 249, 250, which is perfect exposure for me. We talked about this last week. Different processors of raw files will give you different readouts. They'll be close. This is close, but they will not necessarily be the same. Again, it's like using different developers for film. Does this make sense? So has everybody got this part? So my exposure here is fine. Are we good on this part? Does everybody have both of these open in Camera Raw? Okay, so this part's correct. That's all I needed to do for this part. So then I am going to hover over my thumbnail at the top right-hand corner. You get 3 little dots. Click on those 3 little dots and do a select all. That is now selecting the background that does not have the girl and the color card in it. Then I'm going to go back to that same little 3 dots at the top right-hand corner of my thumbnail. Click on it a second time. And in this drop-down menu, I'm going to come down to Sync Settings. And what it'll do is it'll open up a dialog box and it'll say, well, what do you want to sync in here? And I'm going to say the only thing I really care about syncing is the color. And it's already checked, so I'm going to say OK. So now both of them have the exact same color. And it is neutral color. That's the key to all of this. Because then when I go to the studio stuff, I'm going to do the same exact thing. So anyway, I've got both of these guys now. You need to open both of these into Photoshop. I still want to have the girl as a reference for my scaling and everything else. So if you hover over the thumbnail that's down, the open dialog box that's down at the bottom, it should say Open Objects. If yours says Open Image, simply hold down your Shift key, or if it just has Open and there is no object, they keep changing this interface. I'm going to open this as Smart Objects because I prefer to work with them that way. So I'm just going to click on Open Objects, and both of these will open up into Photoshop. Tell me if that does not work for you. Yeah. A long time. I just had somebody send me, I wanted 2 raw files, and they sent me a file transfer via something. I forget what it was, and it was 4.5 gigabytes. And it was thousands of files, and I only wanted 2. Anyway, doesn't matter. Okay, so you now have, and again, I keep mine separate. If you have tabbed behavior, this is exactly the reason I told you probably want to turn that off, because this shit gets tricky where we're going to head now. If you've got 5 or 6 images open and you are pulling elements from one into another and you just are trying to remember what tab is what, yes, I can grab a layer and drag it on top of a tab, but if I hit the wrong tab, then I got to undo that, and it's just a fucking mess. So if you've got tabbed behavior, at least for right now, and you don't want to reset your preferences, tear them apart. Pull both of them off of here so that you've got separate images and not tabs sitting up there. Then you need to find the girl, well, the one with the girl in it needs to be your topmost tab. It needs to be the active image. So just click on it to make it active. You'll see that you do have a version of it, a layer of it with the girl in it. You are going to grab this layer that's got the girl in it and drag it onto the one that does not have the girl in it. Before you let go, hold down your Shift key, because that will bring it in. That will center the one image that we are moving directly over the center of the other image we're moving it to. If you don't do that, you have to align them after the fact, which you could do, but why would you bother to add more time in another step? So simply hold down the Shift key and let go, and she will actually come in there. Now, you just saw a small shift in space, and that's because I was not on a tripod. I was hand holding these guys. That's not going to be the end of the world. I'm not trying to put together these images. Yes? No, you're clicking on, so she's foremost right now, right? Come over and grab the layer, drag it on top of this one, hold on the Shift key, and then let go. No, you want the girl on top of the blank background. Move this guy down, and then hold down the Shift key and let go. No, you're dragging it onto the top. That's the problem with all of this not move this over. Okay, perfect. Move right there. Select the girl. Great. Grab this layer, drag it on top of that image. Now it'll work. Now, sorry. So go back to the center. Take it first. Grab that. Drag it over here. Hold on the shift key and let go. Bingo. And then the one that's got the girl in it by herself, you get rid of. Keep the one that's got both. You don't want to lose that, but you can get rid of the girl that is by herself, because I have a copy of it already. So 013 goes away. Is everybody good? They've got a single image here that's got 2 layers. One that's got the girl on it on top and the other one that doesn't. We good? Okay, oh, another thing we didn't talk about that you need to actually have also in both of your images is focus and depth of field. Right? I need to add that to my list. So that's the other advantage of having a figure in here, is that I have a point to focus on, and I also establish my depth of field based on where I'm going to put that figure. Correct? Okay. All right, go back to that folder that we were looking at. The one that was the capture folder where the trees were just in. You will see that there are now 2 figures that are in the studio on green screen. So again, this is a ENG 102706_B. Anyway, and then so it's frame number 1 and frame number 47. Double click on, select both of those and open both of those. And they will both come into Capture One. I'm not to Capture One, the Camera Raw as well. And the very same deal will be holding true here. So I am going to zoom in. Did everybody get those open? It's 001 and 0047. Yep. Is everybody good on this? Okay. So again, select the one at the top that's got the girl with the card in it. I'm going to zoom in on the card. Is there anything wrong with this card? There's glare on it. So it's not a really great one to judge exposure, but I know my style shooting in the studio, so I know that this is actually going to work. But I'm going to show you a quick check on this to make sure, just to feel like we're in the right spot. But even though it's got glare on it, that doesn't compromise its ability to color balance. It's a lighter gray, that's all it is, but it still should be gray, so it doesn't matter. So again, I'm going to do the same trick. I'm going to grab under my color panel. I'm going to click on the eyedropper tool. I'm going to come over and click on the gray that's right next to the red. In my case, I've done this so many times, and I've got actually the XMP files from the still, so it's just remembering the XMP file. That's why you're not seeing a big shift in this. It's already been done once. However, if I want to check my exposure to make sure that I'm close here, what I would do in the studio is I'm just going to hover over the highlight on the very tip of her nose, and what am I actually looking for? Again, exposure checks. I am looking for a highlight on a Caucasian skin tone to have a red channel value somewhere between 225 and 245. I've got a red channel on this one reading a 248. That tells me that the difference between what I was doing in Capture One, which is a lower set of values, was probably perfect. I was driving this as hard as I could without overexposing this. So I know that by this check that my exposure on this stuff was correct. So then I need to apply the same thing to my other image. So click on the little 3 dots on the top of the thumbnail on the right-hand corner. Click on the little 3 dots, do a select all, go right back to the same little 3 dots again, click on it, come down to sync settings. Default is fine. All I've done is change color. So then that part's good. So then you can click on the version of the girl without the card in it. We do not need to bring both in. We have everything we need just with this one image. So make sure it's the only one selected and click Open Object, and we should be off to the races. All right. Did this work for everyone? I'm going to hide all of my others so that I can only see this. So now you should have 2 images still. You've got the one with the girl who's in the green screen and the one who's got and the woods whole image part is there. Has everybody got that part? We good on this? So again, with these things separate, you want to make sure that the girl on the green screen is front and center. That's the one that is selected. You should see that green screen layer. You're going to grab the layer of the green screen and drag it on top of the woods image. But before you let go, hold down the shift key and then let go, and it will bring it in center to center. We good on this part? Okay, finally, you can get rid of the girl by herself, the green screen image that we just opened, because I have a copy of that layer sitting right here. So now I've got a single image that has the girl on the green screen on the top, the girl who's in the woods in the middle, and then the blank woods at the bottom. Everybody got this? Okay. Say what? Oh, I just closed out the one of the girl by herself. Oh yeah, because you've already copied her over. She's where she needs to be. Again, you're talking about if you keep multiple images open, that takes a lot of resources. You just don't want to do that. All right, are we good on this? All right. So to scale the girl, I'm simply going to drop the opacity of this top image. So I have the very top layer. The girl on the green screen is selected. Grab your opacity slider and simply drag it down. I'm going to drag mine down to like, I don't know, 70%, 65%, something like that. This gives me a good place to actually look at, and I can sort of now start to see and move stuff around. So I'm going to move. I got my V key. My move tool is actually working now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up so that her toes actually match. So, and I'm looking only at the right foot. So if you zoom in on my right foot, I've got the toes to actually, I've just got them to match. It just gives me something that's close enough. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, I'm going to zoom back out. So now you can see she's too short. The girl in the woods is 5'7". The girl in the studio is 5'9", and she's wearing heels on top of it. So she's a good 6 foot. So she's got to be taller than the girl in the woods, and she's not right now. Again, no matter how much I tried to line this shit up, I'm close, but I'm not exactly there. So to fix that, we need to increase the size of the girl. We need to scale the girl on the green screen up so that she matches my scene, because right now she's not even, she's just about 5 feet tall. Does that make sense? Okay, so even with the opacity down, hit Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Now again, I have a problem here because my control handles are outside of my canvas area. So I'm going to hit the circle with the slash through it at the very top to get rid of the transform. Then I'm going to hit the F key to go to the paste board, and then I can do this whole thing again. So I'm going to hit Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Now the problem with transforming like this right now is that the anchor point is right in the center. It's just above her crotch. If I make this girl bigger, what's going to happen is that as this is the anchor point, that point does not move. Everything moves around it. So the area above it will go up. The area below it will go down. The area to the right will go to the right. The area to the left will go to the left. She will no longer have her foot on this part. So I've got to make her bigger, and then I've got to move her again, and then I got to make her bigger and then move her again, and then I got to make her smaller because I made her too big on the. It's just a pain in the ass to do. The easier way to do this is to simply grab your anchor point that's right in the middle and drag it down to her foot. Now her foot is anchored. Everything will scale around her foot. So again, I'm going to click on the link between the width and the height, and then I'm simply going to drag one of my height corners, it doesn't matter which one you do, up till she actually gets bigger. And you can see her foot is staying anchored down at the bottom, and I'm going to make her slightly taller than the girl that is in the woods. So this is where I'm at. If you want the same lift that I did, you could type in 110% in your width and height, and you would be very close. Then I'm going to go ahead and click OK to do this, to accept that part. I'm going to check this out again. She did move to the right, so I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm going to slide her slightly over so that that toe touches again. You can see that there's another rock that's sort of back in here. Hopefully I did my sandbags right. We'll find out. Then I'm going to crank my opacity all the way back up again. And now we can't really see, but if we could, we would be off to the races. To actually be able to see this, I've already given you a knockout. So if you go back to our session 3 our session 9 folders, and go back to the parent of it and click on tree exercise. You will see at the very top there is a composite body 2. Can everybody find that? Double click on this composite body 2. This is actually a knockout of the same exact figure. I'm on the pasteboard now though, so I cannot see my other images. I need to go back to the regular working space. Malia. Back in the parent folder of session 9. So go back to session 9 in the tree exercise folder. That's really where these original files should started from, but I couldn't find the tree folder originally, so we started it with the overlay, but it's the exact same files. All right, is everybody good on this part? All right. So, F key to go to the black pasteboard, F key to go back to the little 3 guys. With the image that has the girl knocked out, you'll see that this is a smart object, but if you double click on this smart object and open it up, you will also see that it really is a smart object of that raw file that has been knocked out and spill removal on top of it. So it's the whole ball of wax. Anyway, I'm going to collapse that again. I just wanted you to know this has still got all the raw data in it, everything else in it. It's just a nested smart object. I'm going to then grab the layer that is just the knockout of the girl and drag it on top of my figure that's got the green screen, and it's also got the woods behind it, all the whole 9 yards. Hold down the shift key and let go. It brings her in space. And then I'm going to simply move her so she covers the other background one. And you can see it's a little bit different in size, but she's awfully close in all of this. So again, I'm not going to belabor this and stay here forever. Does this make sense, everybody, what's going on? Then finally, in your layer stack, you can throw away the one that's still on the green screen. I just didn't want to spend the time knocking this thing out. We could have done it, but that's going to kill our time here, and we got a lot else to do. So I'm going to throw away the green screen version of this. I'm also going to throw away the girl who's in the woods, who's holding the color card. And this is the inception. This is the beginning of my composite. And in doing this, I have matched the lighting direction, the exposure, the contrast is, and this is still off. I've done the color saturation, I've done the shadows, I've done the scaling and the perspective. I also have focus and depth of field. So this is the beginning of it all. Are we good on this part? Does everybody have a copy of this image? Because we are going to continue to work with this, and if you don't have this, you got nothing to continue with. Are we good? Okay. All right. I'm giving you a set of actions. There's a thing called check layers that exist in the people who do compositing. If you're really interested in how you build a check layer, there is a PDF that explains how the whole process is. It's a little bit involved, it's a little bit long. I don't know that you gain that much knowledge out of it. A lot of times I have to go back to the recipe. If I'm missing a set or something goes wrong and I'm missing a set, I'll actually go back in, oh yeah, that's how I set this whole part up. But it's just a series of recipes to create these things. But I've created a collection of actions for you guys to simply load. So instead of spending the next hour and a half building them, we can spend the next hour and a half working with them. Is everybody okay with that part? Like I said, if you're that kind of nerdy person who wants to go in and find out how they were built, whatever, you can pretty much see in them what stuff was done, how stuff was done. But that's going to be our next move in working with this image. Okay, so we need to load those. To find them, if we go back to our session number 9, so in our session number 9, you will see that there is, again, in the parent layer of this, so I'm up in my session number 9, there's a PDF called Check Layers. If you open this up, this is the recipe. This is how you build the check layer for luminosity, how you build the check layer for saturation, and how you build the check layer for color. It's all sitting right here. So if you want to build your own, great. Instead, if you want to just load your own and work with them, it's this thing right here, this check layer set.atn. This is how Photoshop builds collections of actions, and that's what these things are going to be. So to load this into Photoshop, you have to do it from Photoshop. So go into Photoshop, go to your Actions palette. So again, I've selected Actions, my palette here. It's the other tab next to History. Go to the little 3 menu hamburger thing that's on the right side of that. Click on the drop-down menu, and down in the very sort of middle of it, there's an option to load actions. Can everybody find this? Again, you're going to be working with this shit, these check layers for the rest of the semester. So if you're not here right now, you're going to have to watch this video and suffer through trying to get it. So is everybody able to find this load actions part? All right, load actions. Then a dialog box will open up, and we need to navigate to your session number 9. So again, if I go to my Columbia College, retouching, session number 9, student files, I'll load yours. Right here, it actually looks for it and picks it. It is this checklayerset.atn. Just hit open. And it will actually build it. Again, you guys don't have, or at least most of you do not have different sets of actions. So in my case, I always have to look to see where to put it, but I have them all over the place. So I'm going to find my check layers, and it's sitting right here. So can everybody find their version that says check layers? Are we good on this part? All right. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of this Photoshop file that I opened that was the knockout. Again, I'm not closing up. I copied the knockout over to my composite. I'm just going to get rid of this version that's right here. So I've just got one file open that's got 2 layers. It's got the woods and it's got the girl. Everybody good on this part? Great. So we're now going to run check layers. You need to make sure that you have selected your top layer, because you need your check layers to be on top, because what they are going to do is they are going to show you the differences between your figure layer and your background layer, and then we can make adjustments to those things. If you have the bottom layer selected and you run this, then all of your actions will only, all your check layers will only impact your background. They won't have any on your foreground, and it defeats the entire purpose. So make sure you have the top layer selected, the one that is the knockout, and then you need to click on the top parent, the thing that actually says check layers. Do not pick this make a fill. Don't start in the middle of the action and run it. Stay on the very top, click that guy, and then click the arrow that's at the bottom of your actions palette that points to the right, and it will run check layers, and it will see, hopefully you see this nuclear girl. Did that work for everyone? Yes. Oh, it can be, yeah, it can be infrared, it can be also your achievement action. Yeah, yours is actually better than mine. Mine, I've got something turned off, but again, I've got a different set that I just loaded. I'm going to make time to play yours right now. Go ahead. Yeah. It's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Yeah, it's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Sorry, give me 1 second, guys. I'm going to just like yours. Go. Yeah, you go to every single one. Okay, is everybody happy? Yeah. Woo! Thank God. Okay, woo, we're good. Okay, so what we have here is, what check layers do is they help remove distractions so you can focus on very specific things about the image to adjust, to try to get them to match. So by default, the one that comes on first is actually the last one that we use. But what you can see here is that I have taken this is the check layer about color. And what you can see here is that the color of the figure and the color of the background are radically different. That is a problem. That is something that, again, will not, even though they are both color neutral, they are both color neutral. We neutralized the girl using a color card. We neutralized the woods using a color card. That doesn't mean that this part actually worked out this well. Again, from a compositing point of view, we need to get these even closer. And right now, the girl is considerably bluer than this really warm background. So I have a choice. I can either make the background much bluer or I can make the girl much warmer. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because you need to do one other thing first and then we're going to come back to this. So to take a look at what this thing just added, you'll see over in your layers palette up at the very top, there's a group called check layers that are opened up. And in the very top, there's this thing called color check layer, and you'll see it's a hue saturation curve and a color check layer curve both. You need to use both of these together. If you turn off the hue saturation version of this, this is what you see. And this, even though this is showing you the discrepancy in color, it is so subtle when we go to do our color correction, it's really difficult to see that you're doing this. So the hue saturation on top of it is really just to amp this up to make it more obvious what we're really doing. We don't keep any of these check layers. Once they do their job, we get rid of them. So this is just a preview. Again, if you don't understand right now, don't worry, you're going to get this in a second. So I'm going to turn both of these off to begin with. And then I'm going to scroll down. You will see underneath the two that represent the color check layer, you will have a saturation check. I'm also going to leave that off and then go down to the next one down, luminosity check. And if you click on that, you will see it turns your image into a black and white. However, this is a very special black and white. I need everybody to do this really quickly. Yeah, we're in good shape. I need a synthetic file, Command N. So just Command N, and I'm going to do, again, what I typically do, I'm going to change it to inches, and I'm going to do 10 inches wide by 8 inches tall by 300 pixels per inch resolution. RGB is going to be my color mode. 8-bit is fine, white, and then I'm going to change my color profile from sRGB to Adobe RGB and say OK. So basically just a regular file. Make sense, everyone? Okay, if you have your rulers showing, great, we want them. If you don't have them showing, simply come up to the View menu, down to Rulers, and put a check mark next to Rulers, and you'll see them. If you then click on the one that's on the left-hand side and start to drag towards the middle, slow down when you get kind of towards the middle, and this thing will actually snap right to the middle. And then let go. So now we know I've just divided my image in half. That's all I've done. I'm going to then hit the M key to get the marquee tool. Make sure that your tool, it's the second tool down, is the square or the rectangular marquee tool, not the round one. Check to make sure that you have 0 feathering and that the style in this is normal. And then I want to select the left-hand side of this image. To do that, simply click and drag down, just a kind of a square. We did all of this in our selections class. Hold down your space bar so that you can move this around. Jam the upper left-hand corner into the upper left-hand of our image. This is the easiest way to make sure that you've selected just that corner. Remember, if you tried to go up there with your cursor would actually go outside of the image and become a cursor again. It wouldn't be the marquee tool. Let go at this point. So now we've got our top left-hand corner is selected. Drag down to the bottom of your image and then over till it snaps to the guideline, and you now have a selection of the perfect selection of this this half of the image. Is everybody good on that part? So then I want to make my foreground color a pure blue. So click on pure blue. I click on the foreground color to bring up on the color picker. No matter what color you've got, you want to type in, I'm going to do this with RGB values, type in 0 for your red, hit the tab key to go to green, 0 for your green, then tab key to go to blue, and put in 255. That is now going to be a pure solid blue, and say OK. And then because blue is now my foreground color, I want to actually fill this with blue. The keyboard shortcut for Macintosh is Option Delete. For Windows, it's Alt backspace, I think. Anyway, does everybody have a blue half of your image? Anybody not? Okay, I still have marching ants. I want to now fill the other side. The fastest way to do it is simply go up to the Select menu, down to Inverse. This is not going to invert my image, it's going to invert my selection. And that now puts the marching ants on the other side. And now I'm going to change that to a different color. I'm going to fill this with yellow. So click on the blue to open up the color picker again. In yellow, it is a combination of green and red. So type in 255 for the red, hit the tab key, 255 for the green, tab key 0 for the blue. And you will now see that your next new color is going to be yellow. So go ahead and hit OK. And then again, marching ants are on that right side. Yellow is my foreground color. Option delete fills this with yellow. Command D to deselect. Does everybody have the flag of Ukraine on their screen? Are we good about this part? Which of these is brighter? See, you guys, this happens in every class I do. By the time we get to the 9th week, you guys know me so well, you're all thinking to yourself, that fucker is setting me up. I am not saying a word. I am not raising my hand. I'm not going to say, well, of course the yellow's brighter, you idiot. Look at it. How stupid could you be, right? That's what you're all thinking, right? Okay, fine. So let's find out if that's actually true. Wait, how can both be brighter? Okay, if you pulled a 5-year-old in here right now and said, which of those is brighter, which color would you think they would pick? Okay, thank you. That's all we need. Okay, so I am going to then simply desaturate this to remove all the color. So come up to your image. It's a destructive move, but it doesn't matter. Come up to your image, the image menu at the very top. Come down to adjustments and down to desaturate. Are they the same color? If you actually hit Command H to hide that little guideline, they're identical. They have identical brightness. That is not how our eyes see. So instead, what we do is you go back in space, hit Command Z to undo that. I want you to go find this image that we just did. I want you to grab that check layer, the luminosity check layer, and I want you to grab the luminosity check layer and drag it on top of this image and let go. Now you have a radically different view of what brightness is. And this is what we need to balance luminosity in our composites. We cannot base this on brightness. We base this on human perception, and human perception perceives yellow as being brighter, even though mathematically it is identical to that blue. Mario. Then you didn't drop it on top. Again, turn this off. Somehow this desaturation didn't work. So go back in history. Go back to where you hit desaturate. That didn't work. Back to deselect. Both of these colors are fine right now. So then come up and we're going to try to desaturate again. So layer. I'm sorry. Image adjustments. Desaturate. That's wrong. Go back in history again. No, get back to desaturate. Hit Command J to make it around there. And then do the same thing again up to this one. Double click on this over here. So then we're going to desaturate this, so up to image, down to desaturate. Okay, so that's what we expect. Turn this one off. No, turn the top one off. So come into this image. Grab your luminosity layer and drag it on top of this layer. Hold on the shift key and let go. Okay, does this make sense, everyone? So what we are doing with this very specialized luminosity check layer is recreating a black and white image the way we perceive color. Not what it measures, but the way we perceive it. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. So you can throw that layer away now. We've got our work done for us. We are actually going to go after this part right now. So when I take a look at this image, and you look at this image, put yourself into this scene. Do they fit? Again, what are we thinking about in luminosity? Luminosity is exposure. Luminosity is contrast. It's all the issues that are involved in a black and white. We're not worried about color here. We're not worried about saturation. We're simply worried about, does this figure belong in this scene? Not even close. She is so contrasty relative to the rest of this, it's ridiculous. Correct? So how do you guys add contrast in an image? Most of you put a curve on an image, right? You put a curve on an S-shaped curve to actually increase contrast. So let's just actually do this. Turn your luminosity check layer off. We're going to come down to your image, just select the body, composite. We're going to just add a curve on top of this. So come down and click on add a curve, an adjustment layer. It puts a curve on the top. I'm going to grab my shadows and pull them down. It's going to impact both of my layers. The whole image is going to get, and then I'm going to grab my highlights and I'm going to push them up. So what happens when you make your shadows darker and your highlights lighter? You increase the contrast and this is what you get. Correct? So then you would think, okay, well then the opposite must be how I reduce contrast, right? So do just the opposite. Pull your highlights down and pump your shadows up. And you get this. And if you think that this is your best move here for this and that this is it, get out of a commercial career as a photographer, go into fine art, do your damnedest to come up with an artist statement that makes somebody believe that this is art, and then sell it to them for $1 billion, and then come find me when I'm really old and in the home and give me salt and liquor and tell me that you actually made a life out of yourself and you were a career and you had the most wonderful, incredible life, whatever, and regale me with stories, lie to me. Clearly, this is not how you do it, right? This is a massive mistake. So I'm going to show you how you actually do it. Throw away that curve. You don't want it anymore. This is a smart object. If this was not a smart object, even if this was I'm sorry, did somebody say? Even if this was an image that you had pulled in offline, something that was a JPEG, that kind of stuff, and you'd done a knockout, whatever, convert this to a smart object because we are going to use smart filters to control the contrast of this. And you cannot do that. If you don't turn this into a smart object, those filters will actually be destructive. We don't want them to be destructive. If that was not confusing enough, the filter that I'm going to show you is actually not in the filter group. You would think it would be, but that's another Adobe, I don't know. I think that every now and then the engineers get together, do a whole bunch of ecstasy, fuck each other, and then decide to change code while they're still really high and in the glow of wild sex. Not really the time to do your best work. You should be focusing on what is at hand, anyway. Sorry. I've gone after Adobe so many times in so many ways in so many lectures. Clearly I'm running out of things to actually, I need to start recycling older ones because I feel like I'm getting way more extreme. So I'm going to apologize to everyone right now for that last line. It was over the top. I genuinely am sorry and somewhat embarrassed that I went that far, but in my mind, anyway, okay, so this is how you do it instead. So instead, you've got a smart object, make sure it's selected. We are going to turn our luminosity check layer back on right now so that we can watch this happen. You still have the smart object layer is the one selected because we, again, are going to filter this layer. To get to the filter, you come up to the filter menu. No, you come up to the image menu, down to adjustments, and then down to shadows and highlights. This is the only way to reduce contrast in an image that will give you a result that you can live with. I have never seen another way of doing this. So anyway, up to the, again, image menu, to adjustments, down to shadows and highlights, and immediately a dialog box will open up. And by definition, what it does, if you don't see all the stuff that I'm seeing right here, click on the show more options and it will expand so that you can see more. Although to be honest with you, we don't deal with a whole lot of the stuff down at the bottom, so that part doesn't matter quite as much. But anyway, up at the very top, you will see that you've got shadows, and there is an amount slider that is at 35. These are always at the default, a tone of 50 and a radius of 30. This is all controlling how strong the lifting of these shadows actually is. So then underneath that, you've got the same thing in highlights. Highlights are always zeroed out. Most people do reduce contrast because their shadows are blocking up. So most people are trying to lift their shadows. So this simply opens up, and that's the way it is. It's always got these values in it. It doesn't change. So for us, we can actually take a look at this image and say, well, okay, this is beginning to fit my background scene a little bit better. If you want to see the difference, turn your preview check mark on and off, and you can see, okay, well, this is fitting my scene a little bit better. It may not be perfect. I still feel like I've got shadows down in here that are a little bit too dark. But if I take a look at her face is actually fitting this scene a little bit better. Her legs are fitting this scene better. Wouldn't you agree? If you feel like we have opened up the shadows too much, you reduce the amount. So I can drag the amount down here, and I can take a look at this. I still feel like that's too dark. If you feel like they need to be opened up even more, you can just keep cranking this thing up. Just somewhere till you get to the point where you say, okay, this, I mean, if you go up too high like this, that clearly looks out of place as well. So again, our 35 was actually a reasonably good place to start, which is how I'm going to actually start in here. It just happened to be that way. But I look at the top of her coat, her face, again, the shadows that are around, that are in the, like right underneath her boobs and by her waist here, those are still too dark, but those I can actually go after, but the rest of it seems to work for me. Are we good on this? So go ahead and say okay. You will notice that this does create a smart filter, and that if you go later into this process, so when we change color on this and we change saturation, we may have to come back and change this as well. This is not a step-by-step process. This is an iterative process. When I change the color and the saturation on her, I may end up realizing I've reduced the contrast too much. But then you simply double-click on the shadows and highlight, and you go right back in and you adjust it the way you want it to. Because again, this is a smart object, so this filter, as a smart filter, will stay with your image forever. Are we good on that? Okay, I need to still lift the stuff that's in her body right here. So to do that, again, using my check layer that's on this, I'm going to go on top of my image right here, and this is going to be the first way we really use adjustment layers to control the rest of this stuff. So with this body selected on top, I'm going to come down and I'm going to add an adjustment layer to this. So I'm going to click on this adjustment layer. I'm going to put a curve on the top of this. But this part now becomes critical to using check layers. And if you don't get this part right now, they will not work for you. So pay attention to this part really, really closely. We can't even see the color in this image right now. But if I just go in here and put a curve on this and like try to lift those shadows, I'm going to change the color. I'm going to change everything in my image. So your first move in doing this is to change the blending mode of this curve from normal down to luminosity. Because this way now, whatever I do on this will have zero impact on the color. It will only impact the tonal luminosity of this image. Is everybody good on that part? The second thing is that I can't have this affect my background. I need to have this only impact the figure. To do that, you need to clip this layer to the figure. So what you do and what this means, you'll see right now. If you hover, well, first off, if you take a look at the very bottom of your properties panel for the curve, you'll see there's this little icon that's a square with an arrow that's going counterclockwise. If you click on that, you will actually see that this has now been clipped. If you take a look at your curve now that's going to go after those deeper shadows, you'll see that it's actually the whole curve has moved to the right, and then there's this little arrow that points down. And now if you grab the middle of this curve and crank it all the way up, or crank it all the way down, you're only impacting the girl. That's because you have clipped this layer to the layer right underneath it, which is the girl. Does that make sense to everyone? Are we good on this part? Okay, I'm going to tear that off. The other way to do this, if you click on that very same icon, it will go away. It'll no longer be clipped. And now when you push up and down, it affects everything. So I'm going to pull that out of the way. Again, I'm going to then do the other way to do clipping layers. If you hover your cursor between the two layers, between the figure layer and the control layer, adjustment layer above it, put your cursor right between the two and hold down your Option key. You will see your cursor turns into that exact same little symbol, and click, and it will again now clip your layer. So now when you do this part, it'll actually do this one for you. Okay, so finally we are going to lift those shadows. So I'm simply going to grab the shadow marker down at the very bottom, the black point, and I'm going to start pulling this up. Again, I'm ignoring, it's lifting everything on the body, but I'm just looking to get this, I'm gonna do a little bit of overkill here. I'm gonna make it a little bit too light. So this is awfully incredibly light right now. At this point, everybody whip out their tablet. Yes. Have I told you what the new rental cost on the adapter is? The prices got updated in the middle of October. Just kidding. Okay, so overkill. I've completely blown this out. That's fine. So has everybody got their tablet ready to rock on this? Okay, so I'm going to first invert this layer mask. I'm going to make it black. So you can. There's a number of ways to do it. Just make sure that you've selected the layer mask. Command-I fills it with black, so it's now black. You don't see it's not doing anything right now, which is what I want. I want to slowly paint this in. Then I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to check the edge of my brush and make it a medium hardness. You want a little bit of control on this. You want a little bit of edge. You don't want it to be completely slow. You want a little bit of an edge on this. And then, hang on. I'm going to move this down a little bit. You're going to leave this as a normal blending mode. You're going to leave the opacity at 100, and you are going to change your flow down to like something under a 5%. So I'm going to do like a 5, 3, 5, 6% will be fine. I'll just sort of see how this goes. So this is how you want your brush set. So again, medium softness, 50%. Normal blending mode, opacity 100%, and flow way down. Because what flow down will let us do is now scrub this in. So then zoom into this image. We're zooming into the part that we want to lift and simply start. I've got a brush size of 125 pixels. It's fine. I'm just going to start scrubbing around in this area. Nothing happens because black is my foreground color. I need to be painting with white to reveal the change that this curve wants to make. Hit the X key to make white your foreground color, and then just start scrubbing in here. And you can see that took off way too fast for me. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and I'm going to drop my flow down to like a 2% or 3%, and I'm going to start doing the same thing. That's still too fast for me. Command Z to undo that. I'm going to go all the way down to 1%, and then I'm just going to start scrubbing in here, and it's really more like you're dodging this stuff out. And I'm going to come up and hit the area that's up under her collar in there. I'm going to do a little bit that's under her sleeve as well. That may be a little too much. Command Z to undo that. That feels a little bit better. A little bit in the armpit there, a little bit in the tie of the rope here. The other side, we'll open that up a little bit. If you've made a mistake, like I've made, look at my screen right here. See this fold in her coat? That was a little bit too much of a mistake. Instead of undoing everything, you can always just hit your X key, which will make black your foreground color, make your brush a little bit smaller, and then just paint black in this area, and it'll bring the whole thing back in. So now you can actually see what your curve is actually doing. Can I do what? Hang on. Is this working for the rest of you? No? Hey guys, can I get everybody over here really quick? Not to make you, no, don't worry, I'm not making, because this happened, no. I need everybody over here really quick to see this. This does not happen often, and you need to know how to fix this part to see what's actually gone. See this? Okay, so what's causing this is the video card that's actually in here. So you remember when we were talking in performance, I said, because usually this happens in real time. That's usually there's an inconsistency graphic processor, that's the video part in here, you uncheck that. And you say okay. Now this may require a whole restart. We're going to find out right now. Try doing it again. Yep. And so now you're gone. So you work on this part, you're in E, you've got a 6 point here, your black is your foreground color, so you execute it. And then you start painting in there. Again, it's too strong. Command Z to undo that. Lower your flow to 1. And then you start scrubbing in. You can be pretty loose with it. Yeah, but you don't have the weird little graphic things. So when you get those things that come up, but you also need to remember, this doesn't work all the time. So once you're finished with this image, you might want to turn everything back on because this is also slowing everything until it's shut down. Oh, right? No, I know. Okay. Okay, so back to this, double click on the hand. It'll zoom you back out. This is where we are for our image right now, or this is how mine is looking right now. Turn off your luminosity check layer and say, okay, does this fit my scene? Now, when I look at this, I think this is overdone. I think we've actually opened this up too much. So at this stage of the game, I can come down to my shadows and highlights. I'm going to double click on those and I'm going to drop this down. I'm not going to keep this up at 35%. I'm going to start to pull this down till I feel like this seems to fit my scene a little bit better. I've got a color issue here. I can tell you that part right now. But I'm going to go down to a 30 and I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to turn my check layer back on and off, my luminosity check layer, and say, yeah, are you still comfortable with this? Well, yeah, I am still comfortable with this. I think I could even make it slightly darker. What do you guys think? Possibly. So let's try again. Turn the luminosity check layer off. Double click on the smart filter. You actually have to click on the shadows and highlight part. And I'm going to drag this down to 25 instead of 20 or 24. And this is now feeling much better to my scene than it was before. So we are going to do a history snapshot of this right now. So go ahead and click on your history state. Click on your history snapshot. If your problem has fixed, great. Did anybody get a dialog box but me? Oh, yay. Well, then yours is working. Did everybody else get nothing and just put a snapshot 1 up at the very top? Again, that's why I've downgraded to this, because that's what happened to me. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as just as a 1 right here. And then I'm going to, I'm going to turn off my luminosity, my curve adjustment, and I'm also going to turn off, I'm just going to, instead of turning off your shadows and highlights filter, don't do that because it has to completely do the reprocessing and it takes a long time. Simply click on the layer mask of your smart filter and invert it, Command I. It just turns it off. And I'm going to do another snapshot of that. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to leave it as snapshot number 2. Then I'm going to go up to the very top of my history palette and I can go back and forth between these and say, which of these do I like better? Did I overdo this? And I still feel like in a certain way, this is still a little bit overdone, but it could be the color that's in here. Is everybody good on this part so far? This is how you have to ultimately do these things. Are we good on this part? So the snapshot 2 was with all the adjustments turned off. I needed a preview of everything, and it's really hard to go in. I need to turn off a smart filter, and I need to turn off a layer, and you can't do that in one mouse move. But if you make a snapshot of what it looks like that way, you can do really multiple things, or multiple options are on, multiple options off. Okay, everybody good on this part? Okay, the next thing we're going to go to is color. We're going to do color before saturation because, again, you want to get the color right before you play around with saturation. So scroll up to the very top. You can turn your luminosity check layer off now. Your other layers should be on. So this opening up of her shirt, of the blocked up part, I want that part is actually open. I'm going to come up to the very top now and I'm going to turn on those 2 top layers. They're actually in a group. That's why this group is called color check layer. Both of these are sitting in in that group. You just need to turn the eyeball on both of them on, and you go back to your nuclear image. Everybody back to the really super weird looking image. Okay, so we need to change the color of this. To do that, scroll down to your curve. This was your luminosity check layer, the curve that we used to open up her shirt. We now need to add another adjustment layer above that. You've got to keep all of your adjustment layers next to one another because you need to clip them all to the figure. If you put some other image in between, it will then clip to that other image and not to the figure. I need the color adjustment layer that I'm going to add to only impact the figure, meaning I need to clip it. Well, since this first one right here, this one that's opening up the center of her shirt is actually clipping to the figure, the next one that I put on top of it, if I clip it to this one, it will go all the way down to the figure. So I'm going to add another adjust. So make sure that that luminosity curve, the one that we use to open up the center of her coat, is selected. Come down, we're going to add another new adjustment layer on top of this, and we are going to add color balance. So the second you do this, because again, this can so screw you up, the second you do this, you need to change the blending mode of this layer so that it only impacts color. Because this, again, like all adjustment layers, if you don't set it up that way, when we change the color, it is also going to change the tone, which is the luminosity we just worked so hard to get. So click on the drop-down menu of this layer, change the blending mode from normal all the way down to color. And then finally, we need to clip this layer to the entire image below it. So again, you either click on that little icon that is the square with the arrow pointing down, or you're old school like me, you hover between these two layers, hold down your Option key, you get that same little weird icon and click. So then this is only going to impact the figure when we change color. So when I look at this, I like the color of the background. That was, it's supposed to be autumn leaves and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to make that blue. I need to warm the girl up. That's what I need to do. So if you take a look at the sliders that are sitting up here, you can see you have a cyan magenta axis. You've got, cyan red axis, a magenta green axis, and a yellow blue axis. We are dominated in blues in this. So it is this yellow slider that we are going to pump more yellow in and subtract more blue at the same time. So click on this slider, start to drag it towards the yellow range. And what I'm trying to do is get this to reach a point where I feel like it's actually matching the color of the background. Now, at a certain point, when I get around a -30 somewhere in my blue, I'm looking at this readout right here, I don't see any significant other change. Don't push this any harder than that part where it sort of reaches its limit. I'm going to stop at that point right now, and then I'm going to go to my magenta green because I still see green that's existing in this. So I'm going to come up to my magenta green slider, and I'm going to start pushing this towards the magenta to get rid of some of that green. And it starts to pull in a little bit of red. I'm not going to go totally insane on this. I'm going to stop it right about here because it's keeping in a little bit of green, but there's a little bit of green on all of these details in here. But now you look at this figure and you say, okay, now does the color match these two? In a huge way, right? Turn your eyeball of this thing on and off and you can see what it is we've actually done. We have actually pulled her whole color palette into this screen, into this background. So if you want the same values that I have, I've got in the yellow blue slider a -26, in the magenta green slider a -9, and in the cyan red it's at 0. Yes? In this case right now, we've sort of trumped that all by using a blending mode to keep it only in color. But I would never change this because, again, if I've done all this work to have luminosity where I want it, I don't want anything changing my luminosity. But I think the blending mode it may be redundant, but I would do it regardless. Okay, so then if you feel good about this, go up and turn off the hue and saturation and color, and this is where we are now. And now when we come down and turn our color check layer on and off, this is a radical difference and a perfect marriage of the color of this image. And all of a sudden, this composite is beginning to work. turn off the top. So do you have you turned off the check layers? Your color check layers at the top? Yeah, turn them both off. Then come down, this hue saturation layer, you can turn it on and off. This is what we just did. Which do you prefer? Well, which do the rest of you prefer? Is this believable? More believable?
Yeah.
Like by a million miles more believable? No. Fucking game changer now, because all of a sudden this girl is really falling into place. I still have no shadows underneath her or that kind of stuff, but this is really beginning to hit the mark here. Wouldn't you agree? Again, guys, this is the shit that nobody teaches you. This is the shit that most retouchers don't actually know. And this makes it so simple, because if you come in here and you try to spot that and say, well, what's really wrong with this? Do I know that she is really cool underneath all of that, and that can't really fit in a scene that is so dominated by warmth? Because there's light has got to be coming up off of all those yellow leaves. There's got to be some warmth in here. So this starts. So then at this stage of the game, when I'm looking at it, I say, well, okay, my luminosity in this is just fine. I don't need to make this girl any darker. I don't need to open up my shadows anymore. She fits into this now. Right? So then the final one we have to do is our saturation check layer. And this isn't going to show up too well on this particular image, because the only thing that's really could be saturated really is her face. But nonetheless, we should look at it. So if you click on your saturation check layer, what saturation does is that anywhere in an image that is lighter is more saturated. Anywhere in an image that is darker is less saturated. So you can see her coat is completely black. It has no color in it. It's a black coat. There's no saturation in it. It's a neutral. It's a gray, right? Grays have no saturation in them. That's why they are gray, right? So that's not the thing that I would really look at. What I would really be looking at really more is her face in this. And her face, because it is lighter than pretty much anything else in my image, except for those really super yellow leaves that are in the back, her face seems a little bit oversaturated to me. So it's the final move we're going to make here, and we'll see if this part actually works or not, helps or not. So to do this part, to fix it, again, leave your saturation layer on, come down, click on the hue saturation layer that the color balance layer that we added. Click on that, because we need to then add our saturation adjustment above it so that we can still clip it all the way down to the figure. So we're going to go down to the adjustment layer at the bottom, little icon with a circle and the square, the circle. Add another adjustment layer. We are going to add a hue saturation layer to this. So this thing actually opens up. Again, immediately change the blending mode of this from normal down to saturation. And then again, either click on the little icon at the very bottom of the palette, of the properties palette, to clip it, or hover between the two, hold down your option key and clip it. So again, this will now only impact the girl. And then I'm just going to grab my regular saturation slider and I'm going to start to pull it down. What you'll see is her face should get darker as we do this. So if we go way down, you can see it gets darker. That's actually too dark. What I'm looking to do is probably match something a little bit more in the stones and the leaves that are kind of in the front. So I'm feeling like this is a little bit better. If you want the same thing I've got, is it's a -10. And I'm doing it as a master. Some people would go in and target this. I think that's a mistake. I like to do it as a global change. So it's changing the saturation of her coat as well. That part doesn't matter to me. Then to see if this worked, I'm going to come up and uncheck my saturation check layer, and then I'm going to come back down and turn on and off that hue saturation adjustment. And you can see it sucked a little bit of that red out of her cheeks, a little bit of that red out of her skin. I actually think it fits the background a little bit better, so this is what I'm going to go with. So finally, to see where we're at, I'm going to do one more history snapshot of this. This is with everything corrected, and I would name this, so I would call this corrected, and say okay to that. Scroll up to the very top. My snapshot number 2 was with none of these things on, so I'm going to click on my snapshot number 2. Actually, my snapshot number 2. This is where we started with our composite, right here. And most of you would turn this shit in, hoping that people would, I don't know, somehow believe it, or this, the corrected version of it? And which do you guys think fits? Say what? Oh, by a million miles. A million miles. This changes everything. And again, put in a few shadows here, you'll never know the difference. Are we good on this part? Okay, so now would be a good time for a break. I'm gonna call it 3:50. Hard 10 minutes, guys. Be back at 4 o'clock and I'll plot out the rest of our day. So one last thing I wanted to talk about with our image. So I haven't closed. If you've closed yours up, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, that part. At this stage of the game, you could come in and fine tune things a little bit. You could say, yeah, okay, I think maybe I need to. I don't know. I don't really actually know what else we could do with this. I might say to myself, if I really think that the light from the top is pretty heavy and coming down, I might want to actually help recreate a little bit of that lighting sense. So I don't know if this is going to work, but I am going to try it. I'm going to show you the last final thing that I would do in this if this was my composite. Because I feel like her legs are possibly a little bit too light, but we'll see. Because I'm trying to give a little bit more direction to the light. So to do that, I am going to, again, pick my very top adjustment layer, not my check layer. My check layers are now all off. And to be honest with you, at a certain stage of the game, I throw away my check layers just so that I don't inadvertently turn something on or that kind of stuff. You can always add them back again. We're not going to do that right now, but it's just something to keep in mind. With them all off, I'm going to go to my top layer. It was the last adjustment we made, which was the hue saturation layer, to suck a little bit of that redness out of her face. Remember, we pumped in an enormous amount of red and magenta to try to get her coat and her legs and and all of that stuff to match the background. Well, that got pumped into her face as well. And it wasn't that the color was necessarily so wrong as much as the saturation part of it, I think, made the sort of redder areas of her face too red. And so the saturation pulled that part back without really impacting the clothes themselves really at all. But the last thing I'm going to do is try to create a sense of lighting direction. So this is how I do it. So to do that, we're going to add another adjustment layer on top of the hue saturation. So back to adjustment layers, and we're simply going to add a curve to this. And in the curve, again, this is a tonal thing here. I don't want it to impact color. I don't want it to impact saturation. So we're going to change the blending mode from normal down to luminosity so that I can just make things darker or lighter. I'm not going to change anything else in here. And then I need to make the image actually darker, and I'm going to start with my highlight parts to make this darker. I'm going to grab my white point slider at the top, and I'm simply going to pull this down. And you can see it's making the entire image darker because I have not clipped this to the figure. So I need to clip this to the figure. So I'm going to hover on the line between my new adjustment layer and the one right below it. Hold down my Option key, get the clipping icon, click on it. And now you can see it's making the image darker. And I just make it too dark because I can always go back in and adjust this later, which is what I'm going to do. So I just need to be able to see it. That's really all I'm talking about here. So don't worry about how dark it is right now. We'll do a final adjustment of that once we get this masked correctly. So this is impacting my whole image. I don't want to impact the whole image, so I am going to invert the layer mask. So you do have brackets around this layer mask, so Command I will invert it. So that's now hiding all of that curve that was making things darker. You can see I've got a black layer mask on here. Then I'm going to go to my pasteboard at this part because I need a really big brush. And I want to make sure that my brush is going to work the way I need it to work. So I'm going to hit the F key to get to the pasteboard. And then I'm going to hit the brush. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make this a completely soft brush. So 0% hardness. It is going to be a normal blending mode. It is going to have 100% opacity. And it is also going to have 100% flow. So bring those all the way up again. And then what you need to do, what I'm going to try to do to this, is leverage the soft edge of that brush. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a brush that the center of my brush is where her feet are, and then the edge of my brush falls probably at her waist. So what I'm trying to figure out is at what point do I need to have the light start to actually fade off of this and get darker. So with my brush sitting on this image, I'm going to use my bracket keys to make it much, much larger. So I'm going to keep making it larger. And again, what I'm looking for, I'm going to put the center of my brush at her feet. So the center of my brush is at her feet. And the edge of my brush is right at the bottom of her jacket. I know it's really hard to see my brush outline in this, but can you guys see that? Okay. So what that means is that the impact at the center of my brush is 100% on. But then as I start to go away from that, it starts to fade to the point where I finally get up to the very top where the edge of the brush touches the bottom of her jacket. It ends up leaving. Again, I need white to do this, so white is my background color. I'm going to hit the X key to make it my foreground color. And then here's the trick, guys. Get the center of your brush right where her feet are, and you want to, we're working on the layer mask for this layer, and you want to simply tap once and let go. Now, in that case, you can see what it did. If you want to see what this brush stroke actually looks like, hold down your Option key and click on your layer mask, and that's what it looks like. So you can see that this curve that's making everything darker is going to be impacted the greatest here, but then as we start to move up, it starts to fade off, which will then mimic how the light fall off would actually work, correct? The light would be more fallen off at her shoes than it will be at her waist. That's what this is trying to recreate. So I'm simply going to click back on the layer mask so that I can see the whole thing on and off. You can then turn this on and off, and you can see sort of what this has done. Now, in my case, I feel like this has pulled it down a little too much. It's close, but I feel like it's pushed it down a little bit too. Her shoes seem a little too dirty and muddy and dark to me. So I'm simply going to come back to my curve and adjust this in real time. So I'm going to lift this back up a little bit. So I'm going to pull it up here. So I'm sort of like, if you want the same level again that I've got an output level of 176 for that white point. And then again, turn this guy on and off. And you can see it just adds a little bit more believability to that up overhead light. It's a little bit more balanced in here. It's not quite so flat lit in the front, which is what we achieved with all the highlight shadow layer mask. And then finally, the last thing that I was telling you guys about this is that, so now I've got an image that is cohesive. So then at that stage of the game, there is no reason that I can't come on top of my image. So I'm going to add one more curve, but the curve that I'm going to add now is going to be universal. It's going to be for every single thing on here. So I'm going to add a hue saturation curve to this on the very top of all of that, and I'm going to really radically desaturate my image because I'm really into this look. But you can see, because I made it cohesive to begin with, that then to actually try to mimic, this would be like an imitation of like possibly a really old Agfacolor transparency film that was aged. This would be, I mean, does that make sense what's going on here? You can do all sorts of things to this. You can do, well, all sorts of things. I can desaturate things. I can push it. I can make, let's try another thing. Let's grab the, zero the saturation back out again, and let's just take the color and shift it. So I'm going to grab the hue slider at the very top, and I'm going to push it in the blue direction and say, okay, wow, yeah, this is going to be my new look. This is sort of like imitating that really bad Hollywood look where all the shadows are green and all the highlights are yellow, whatever. Not that that's really what this is, but you can see that because I made them cohesive to begin with, now I can push this in any direction that I want to push it. Make sense? This would be, when we were talking about our layer stack order, this would be color grading as opposed to color correction. All right. You do not need to keep this image. You hit the F key once to get to the black pasteboard, F key again to get to the white pasteboard, or the no pasteboard, and close this guy up. You don't need to save it unless you want to. Okay, last thing that we're going to do for this class is build an artificial background. So you have your assignment over the next 2 weeks is to create 2 composites. The 2 composites that you're going to create, the first one is going to be something like this. It's going to be and I'm just going to use the term figure and background. If figure for you is a hot dog, that's fine. I don't care. If figure for you is a person, great. If figure for you is your dog or your cat, I don't care, mom or dad, I don't care. If your figure is a Perel soap dispenser on the wall that that keeps us all COVID free, fine. I don't care what it is. I'm just thinking figure background. Anyway, your first assignment as a composite is to use a real figure and, oh, actually I take that back. I lied. Hang on, we need to look at this. I totally forgot what the assignment was. You remember that whole part where I just told you don't worry about the figure? I lied. I'm giving you the figure. You have to come up with the background. So here, if we take a look at we'll just take a quick look at our assignment folder, and then I'm going to show you what a composite background looks. You have two options of figures. You have this one right here, and you have this one right here. Those two are going to be you're going to create two composites. You can use either of the figures twice. You can use one in one and one in the other. You can use, that part doesn't matter to me. That really has to do with what you're compositing. Does that make sense? Okay. So then the way the assignment reads is on this first one is to shoot a real background and create a composite using either that comp body 1 or comp body 2. You do not have to shoot something. You can go out online and find a real image. But don't go out and find don't get an art illustration, don't get a painting, don't do something like that. Get something that's a real background that forces you to really composite these things into a legitimate background. So you can use old work of yours, you can shoot new work, or you can use found work. I don't care. Does that make sense? And then the second part of this assignment is to create a background that is entirely man-made. I'm going to do that for you right now so you'll see what I mean by the entirely man-made part. Okay? And then the rest of it is just to watch the videos that are in the resources for session 9 and then to consider bringing working image files for your final, not next week, but the week after that. And get some rest. Like, I don't know, go do something really stupid in this class time. And all right, so, okay, so man-made background. Last thing that we're going to do here is the build background exercise. So we're still in your session number 9 folder, the build background exercise. So there are 4 files inside of here. There's a background wall 1, a background wall 2, a concrete glossy cement, and a puppet warp figure. We're not going to deal with puppet warp today. That happens our next class meeting when we get together. Don't worry, you're not going to need that for this. It's got the name, and I'm going to use it again for that demo, so for what that's worth. So I want everybody to open up both background wall 1 and background wall 2. You can leave concrete glossy cement where it is right now. So I'm just going to select them both, hit Command O. They will both open up. Now in this case, they're not going through Camera Raw because they're already baked files. So basically what you'll see here, again, I have my tabs torn apart. It would be wise of you to keep your tabs torn apart as well so that we can do dragging and dropping between the two. So in this case, what I've got, this was an idea for a whole set of images that I wanted to do. You know, well, it's like the building that they're doing right up by the photo studio. They're tearing the building down. And whenever they do that, you can actually see inside the building, and you see like old rooms and wallpaper and, you know, just shit. It's sort of like, you know, the layers of the onion have been peeled back of that, right? I wanted that kind of vibe. So I was looking for this place that basically had really distressed walls that had paint on top of wallpaper. I mean, that was the vibe that I was going for in this. And I couldn't find it. I mean, I looked everywhere and I couldn't find it. So I decided I was going to build it myself. So that's what this goal is on all of this. So I'm going to show you how I went about doing this, just to possibly give you some pointers and direction about how you can do this as well. So that's going to be the job. I've also had people then turn right around and use the image that we build right now for their assignment. Don't do that. I want you to be original in the man-made background that you build. I don't want you to say, well, yeah, I just built one in class with you and I'm using it. That's what I would do. But anyway, but that's why I'm telling you not to do that. Okay, so to start with this, I'm going to actually add the wallpaper to the Peely paint. So the wallpaper thing, I went to, you know, like the paint store, and I got just samples of wallpaper, and the sample of wallpaper was literally the size of a piece of paper, and I scanned it. I just threw it down on a scanner and I scanned it. That's all that is. The Peely paint on the wall thing, I don't know if you guys, there's an overpass right around Ashland Avenue and Addison where the Metro trains run, and it's a really old overpass, and it's completely falling apart, right? And I thought, well, this is exactly the sort of the texture that I want. So this is actually shot with a camera, but it is the size of a paperback book. That's the size of this. So everything that I'm dealing with here is smaller than an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. However, I'm going to use it as a room for a person, full figure. That's going to be the goal on here. We'll see how well we do. So to start with, if you click on the Peely Paint part first, you'll notice that there is a curve on the top of this thing. It's a contrast curve. And the only reason I point that out is that you want to have the curve actually turned on and selected, because when I bring in the wallpaper, I don't want the wallpaper to also have contrast added to it. If anything, I want that to fade more. But I felt like that the wallpaper, that the Peely Paint background thing was a little bit too flat and lacking enough dimension. So that's the reason I've done what I've done right now. So then I'm going to go back to my wallpaper, and I'm going to grab the wallpaper layer, drag it on top of the paint one, hold down the shift key to center them, and let go. And it's going to bring it in right on top of this. Now, at this stage of the game, this part's fine. So everybody should have something that looks like this. Is everybody good on this part? I'm going to get rid of the wallpaper scan. I don't need it anymore. It's everything it had. I've already brought it in, so it's sitting right here. However, what I don't have here is it's not covering my entire background. So if you move it, which you can, I'm going to again hit the V key and hopefully not get something weird. And I'm going to just grab this and pull it over. You can see that there's actually more to the wallpaper. So I'm going to drag it over all the way to the left. But I've got on the right side, I scanned this on a piece of green background. I don't want to remove the green background because that'll just be a hole in my image. So what I'm going to do instead is just slide it all the way over to the left, so that I've got wallpaper all the way to the left-hand side. And then I'm just going to transform this to make it a little bit larger to get rid of this hunk of green that's on this side. So with the wallpaper selected, Command T, actually before you do that, make this a smart object. Up to the layer menu, down to smart object, and convert to smart object. We might as well work non-destructively. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I'm going to click on the link between the width and the height. I could, in all likelihood, just stretch it a little bit to the right. It would deform the roses and whatever this wallpaper is. It's not going to deform it a whole lot, but there's really no reason to do that. So I'm just going to, again, click on the link between the two. I'm going to grab the height slider, and I'm just going to make it a little bit larger so that it entirely covers the background like it is right now. Go ahead and hit the check mark, and we are actually ready to go on this. So I do have a line. I have a series of guidelines that are on my background right now. I don't want those on there, so I'm going to go up to, do you guys have those guidelines? Yeah, I'm going to go up to the view menu, and I'm going to come down to guides and down to clear guides. So look up at my menu to see where I'm at. Guides down to clear guides. We'll get rid of those guys. So there's strategies about how to actually do this, to actually try to get the sense of what's going on. But remember what I said to you. I'm not looking to have wallpaper on top of paint. I'm looking to actually have paint on top of the wallpaper. So the first couple of strategies that most people do would be to change the blending mode of this. So we're going to change the blending mode of the wallpaper. So come up to the blending mode menu, click on the drop down, and your first move is to bring it down to overlay. And when you bring it down to overlay, it does merge them together pretty well. But the problem is that if you zoom in on this, you've actually got stuff that's behind the paint and stuff that's on top of the paint, both. Well, that's not real, so that's not going to actually work for me. You can do soft light. Soft light is just a less strong version of the same thing. That's not going to work for me, so that part isn't going to happen. So I'm going to double click on the hand to jump all the way back out. I'm going to change this back up to a normal blending mode. Then you can put a layer mask on this thing. So I'm going to actually add a layer mask to this. I'm going to add a dark layer mask to this. So if you hold down the Option key before you click on layer mask, it'll add a black one. And so now all of the wallpaper is hidden. I'm going to go to my trusty pen and my tablet. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'll keep it at a normal blending mode, 100% opacity. I'm going to crank my flow way down. I'm going to bring it down to like a 4 or 5%. White is my foreground color because I'm going to be painting on a black mask. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller because it's gigantic right now. Yeah, and so now I'm down around a 90, somewhere 90, 100, whatever. And again, with this mask, I can start scrubbing in these areas where I want this to actually look like the background is actually coming through in all of this. And I can try to get in and hopefully that I don't screw things up here, whatever. But what a colossal pain in the ass that is. And it doesn't really respect a lot of the edges that I've actually got going on in this paint. I mean, this is not the way to go about doing this. So this is not an option for me. So I'm going to throw this layer mask away. And instead, I'm going to try to build what they call a luminosity mask. Now, we've already used luminosity masks, even if you didn't know that that's what they were called, when we were making selections of like the girl with the hair that was all fanned out. And we used one of our channels to actually do that. That was a luminosity mask. That's what we ultimately created for this. So I'm going to try to go after the same thing in this. So that's going to be my goal here. So I'm going to turn off the eyeball for this, and I'm going to go looking at my layers. So I'm going to click on my red layer and take a look at it. And if I use this as a mask, it would help respect the areas that I want to respect in this. It would actually help say, okay, well, you've got these edges. Like I know that these really dark edges that are up in this area up in here, those would actually hide the wallpaper, so it would look like the wallpaper was underneath it. But the rest of this is like, this whole thing is dominated by light tones, so it's going to let the vast majority of the wallpaper come through, so the wallpaper is actually going to look like it's on top of the paint and not underneath it, because it's going to show so much of it. So I'm also looking for contrast in here. So red is not really my move here, I don't think. I'm gonna look at the green one. The green one makes part of this background a little bit darker, doesn't help me a whole lot. And then finally the blue one. And the blue one seems to have the greatest amount of contrast already in it. So that's the one I'm gonna start with. So I'm going to duplicate this blue layer. Simply drag it down, and I'm going to rename this luminosity mask, L-U-M-I mask. So I want the paint to seem like it's on top. That means that the paint really needs to dominate the scene. If I use the mask as it is right now, well, let's try it. We're going to use the mask as it is right now. I'm going to just hover over this, over the thumbnail, hold down my command key, click to load it. It has now loaded the luminosity of my image. Now, I don't see any marching ants, and the reason I don't see marching ants is in all likelihood I've still got a hide going on in here. So Command H will actually bring back my marching ants. I don't see anything, so I'm going to hold down my command key and click on this again, and now I get the marching ants. So I've got marching ants going on it. It is simply loaded the luminosity of this. So when I add this as a layer mask, it's just going to look exactly like this layer right down here. That's what it's going to look like. Yes? We are going to, so everybody has marching ants, right? Okay, great. So then go back to our wallpaper layer on the very top, select it, and also turn it on so that you can see it, turn the eyeball on. So I'm gonna click on the eyeball to turn it on. I'm going to select it, and then I'm just gonna add a layer mask to it. So come down and click on the little square at the bottom with the circle in the middle, and click it, and you add it as layer mask. And you can see that because this layer mask, again, to see the layer mask by itself, hold down the Option key and click on it, it's dominated by light tones, so it is letting the vast majority of that wallpaper show. Remember, in a layer mask, black conceals, white reveals. This mask is dominantly white, so the wallpaper is showing. I want the opposite of that. What would be your strategy to give me the opposite of this? Or the inverse of this? I'm going to invert the mask. So you're going to watch it happen in real time because I'm not going to put it back on the image. Command I. Now the mask is dominated by dark tones, and now when you take a look at this, you can see that the wallpaper is the secondary player in this, that the paint is now really the major player in this. Does that make sense? So then if we look at the mask by itself, hold down the Option key and click on the mask itself, you can see areas in here that are light are what are actually going to show the wallpaper through. Areas that are dark are actually going to show the paint. So you can see up in here, there's you can sort of get a texture. See where it's all really textury in here? That's sort of it's like cement underneath that. That is the background. That is not the smooth paint. Then areas up in here, this dark area up in here, this is all paint up in here that's actually peeling. So I want to accentuate this. This is too subtle for me. So I want to accentuate this, but I want to keep this luminosity mask intact. So this is what I'm going to do. Remember, the areas that are lighter are going to show the wallpaper. So I want to show a little bit more wallpaper. So I need this area to be a little bit lighter. I also don't want any of it coming through on the part that's actually on the darker part on the paint. So I can do this on a wholesale level right now. So the easiest way to do this basically is to run levels on this, right? I can use levels to make the lighter areas lighter, the darker areas darker. So I'm going to show this to you in real time. Don't do this yet. We're going to do this all together in just one second because you can't do this as an abstract. You've got to do this while you're watching the cumulative effect of what we're doing. But I just want to make sure everybody understands what I'm doing right now. So with the layer mask selected, this is not an adjustment layer. You cannot use an adjustment layer to impact only a mask. This is a destructive move, but that's okay. I've got, I can always recover. I can always build another one. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And again, if I take the lighter areas and make them lighter, sorry. If I could get this to work, let's try that again. My computer is so unhappy right now, it's ridiculous. All right, let's try that again. Let me make sure that that didn't have, all right, so I'm in my history, I'm back to the invert layer. So Command L to bring up the levels dialog box, click on this and drag it back, and you can see I'm making the lighter areas lighter, and then I can make the darker areas darker. So the darker areas now, that's the paint that's mostly on the outside. That will actually be covered. I'll be good there. I'm going to grab my lighter areas and pull it back. But you see, I'm maintaining all of the texture of this. The luminosity is being preserved in all of this. So I'm going to watch this in real time instead. So I'm going to hit cancel on this. You guys can do this with me right now. I'm going to turn this on so that I can see what's happening. But I still need to do the levels adjustment on the layer mask. So now we can see the whole thing happening in real time. Command L. And again, I'm going to take my white point slider and pull it back to basically clean up the paint to get the wallpaper off the paint. And then I'm going to grab my shadow point slider and start to pull it over again more to sort of, oh, that's actually cleaning up the paint. The other one is actually opening up the mask to let more background come through. And I need to see what's really going on in here because it looks like all of this has gone to hell. So hang on one second. I'm going to cancel out of here and do this in real time again. Command L. So again, I want the darker areas to be the paint only and the lighter areas to be the background only. And this looks like a better mask for me. So I'm just going to do it this way, and then we can turn it on and off and see what happened. So if I go back to my image right now, so this is the impact that I've had with my layer mask on here. Does this make sense what I'm doing here? Okay, so that's one way of doing it, to do it with levels. The second way to do it is by hand. So to do it by hand, if you click on your layer mask and actually take a look at it, I'm going to go back where we were originally before I ran layers levels on this guy, just to see that you can do this by hand. I can paint directly on this guy, so I can hit a brush and I can actually paint directly on this guy. But if I pick, again, I've got a normal blending mode, a soft brush, which I'm going to keep, 100% opacity. I'm going to grab my flow all the way up. So 100% flow. I'm painting with black, so I can make these darker areas like this stuff in here black. So this is the paint stuff right here. But you can see that ruins all of the texture of that mask. That is just hitting the shit out of this thing. How can I make this thing darker but preserve the texture, the luminosity, the quality of that mask? How can I do that? Charles? Yeah, not color mode, but overlay, just like we did the overlay brush when we were refining masks for that. I could do that. What else? What other tool could I use for this? Dodging and burning, maybe? Wouldn't that maintain it? Yes, it would. So I'm going to undo this, Command Z. You guys can all do this with me right now. So I am going to take a regular brush. I'm going to change the blending mode of this down to overlay. Black is my foreground color. So now when I start to paint on this, it goes completely off the charts. It's way too strong. Command Z to undo that. I'm going to drop my flow down a little bit, around a 6.5, something like this. Then I can come in and work on this, and you can see this is actually maintaining, if you zoom in on this, this is maintaining some of that texture. It's still a little bit too heavy-handed on that, so I'm going to undo that, bring my flow way down, and then start to scrub in here. And you can see it's keeping that quality of that texture part on there, and that's actually what I want on this. Unfortunately, I'm making this darker in an area that I really should be making this lighter, because this is the background where I want that other stuff to show. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, the X key to give me white, and then I'm going to start to pull this back to allow more of the wallpaper to show through. If you feel like that's not happening fast enough for you, you can pop the flow up in this so that you can hit a little bit harder. And you can see I am keeping all of the luminosity in this. It's still got that texture of cement, but then this is what it's going to actually look like in real time. So this is what's actually showing in it right now. And if I go back to when I inverted this, sorry. Yeah, we'll go back part of the way here. So it's this to this. Sorry, fuck. This, snapshot 1, or this. You guys get where this is going. I'm going to spend the rest of our time just trying to unfuck this up. So I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to work on this the way I would. So I'm going to back out on this. And so areas where I want more of the wallpaper to show, I'm simply going to work on those. I'm on my layer mask. Again, they need to be lighter to be shown. So with white as my foreground color, I'm going to start working in all of this area in here to actually pull this part in. And I like what's happening in there. That part's looking good to me. For areas like up here on the paint peel that are showing it, I'm going to hit the X key and actually get rid of that so that it's not showing that part anymore. I'm going to do the same thing around all of this paint. I'm going to clean all of that part up. But you can see you can be really loose with your brush, but because you are actually using an overlay blending mode, it's actually respecting all of the paint layer part that's actually on here. So I'm going to continue to work my way through this. This whole part right down here is background, so back to my black color here to actually pull this part in, and all of this in, and all of this in, and all of this down here in, and this, and this, and that. And clean the rest of this out a little bit more. Okay, so I'm happy with my background, but I don't feel like you can really see I don't think the wallpaper part's really that interesting. When I look at this, it's like, well, okay, yeah, I kind of know what's going on, but I want to be able to see a little bit more of that part. So to do that, you need to break the chain link between your mask and the figure. So I'm going to click on this link between the mask and the figure. The mask is perfectly in place. It was based on this image. I just need to move the wallpaper around. So I'm going to click on the wallpaper. Again, I've broken that link, hit the V key to move this, and then I can actually move my wallpaper around to my little heart's content so that I feel like, oh yeah, I like this part better, or oh, let's see, no, I don't like that part better. I really like this part better. This is really more where I'm going for, is right in here. You guys can see where you can edit this shit forever. Is everybody good on this part? Questions about this? All right, at this stage of the game, save your work really quickly. We're actually going to make it here on time. I'm certain we are. So I'm just going to do, this is not part of your homework. You just should be in the habit of saving your work periodically. So onto my toss volume, save, say okay. So I'm going to double click the hand right now, and we're now going to bring in our figure. So if you go back out to our working file, to our session number 9, in the build background exercise folder, there's this thing called Puppet Warp Figure. If you'll double click on that and open that up. And then I'm going to hide everybody else. And then again, if you take a look at what's going on in this, we've got a figure. She looks like she's on white. I think yours is pretty much set the same way. However, there is a white background that's on. If you uncheck that, it'll turn it off. And then you've just got the white figure background itself. It's a group. If you open up the group to see what's inside of it, there's a lot of curves and stuff in here that are doing sort of manipulations of this. So all the retouching is in this. I don't want to actually work with all of that part. So what I'm going to do, with everything turned off, I'm going to then duplicate my figure. So click on the figure group, Command J will make a copy of it, and in the copy I'm going to make the entire figure group a smart object. So up to the image layer menu, down to smart objects, to convert to smart object. And you'll see when you do that, you lose the aspect of it being a group and you just have the smart object. I'm going to drag this on top of my image. So click on this figure copy, drag it over on the top of my new background, hold down the shift key and let go, and it brings it in. I'm going to then close up my puppet figure, warp 1. Do not save that. I don't want to save those changes in it. And so this is basically where I am and where I'm going to actually start trying to make this a background for her to be in. So what is the problem with my composite right now? She's floating. There is no floor. I need a floor. So I went online to find a floor. My whole idea of this was that it was going to be, again, that building that was being torn down. I just wanted a concrete floor. So I went online. I found a glossy floor on some online website that gave you free, images. And so that's the last thing we need to open up. So go back out to that folder, and it's the glossy cement JPEG. If you'll double click on that one and open it up. If you don't get this warning, your things are set up wrong, because this has got an sRGB color space in it, and we are working in Adobe RGB, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. It doesn't really matter. I'm fine with it managing color the way it's managing color. I'm going to hide everybody else. And so now I actually need to bring this, and you can see what's happened. This is somebody who shot a floor. They're doing this. They're standing up like this, and they're shooting a picture straight down on the floor. Well, that's not the floor. That's a wall for me. This isn't going to work for me that way. So I need to modify this into a floor, but I'm going to do it in my composite image. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my composite that I'm working on right now. If I drag the floor in now, it's going to be on top of the figure. That's not where I want her. I want her underneath the figure on top of my wall. So select the top layer of the wall so that when we drag this in here, it will go underneath the figure but on top of my background. So then I'm going to go back to my concrete background, click and drag this across, hold down the shift key and let go. It's going to give me this warning. Do you want to maintain color? Do you want to preserve color appearance? Yes, I do. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Then I'm going to get rid of the spare file that was my concrete glossy wall. And now I've got a fine art poster of a girl on a concrete wall with paint shit around her, and this is my new career. And I'm certain I can get, I don't know, some AI to generate an artist statement for me that would make this make sense to someone. Anyway, okay, sorry. To do this as a floor, we need to radically change its perspective. So to do that, you want to go to the pasteboard. So F key to go to the pasteboard. I'm going to go ahead and make this a smart object as well, because this is going to be a radical transformation and very destructive. Up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object. So this is now converted to a smart object. Is everybody kind of with me on this one so far? We good for the most part? Up to the edit menu, down to transform, and in transform we are going to do a perspective transform. So what perspective does is it actually anchors some of these control handles together. The first one we're going to set is actually the upper part of the wall. The stuff that's up at the very top, that's going to be the first thing that I'm going to go after, because I need to make this thing at least as wide as my image. So if you click, it doesn't matter which corner you click. You can click the right corner or the left corner. If you click and pull this to the right, click the right one, you'll see that the left one also, they go out equally. It's doing a transform to keep this, to try to generate the notion, the idea of perspective. And now if you take a look at it, if you turn off the figure, you see it begins to look, it's starting to look like a ceiling, right? That's what my perspective move is. But now I'm going to radically change the other part, the lower part of this. So I'm going to make this image smaller. Again, your keyboard shortcuts will do that. Hold down the spacebar command and the option key to temporarily get the minus zoom tool. I'm going to still go right back to that transform again, up to the edit menu, down to transform, down to perspective, and I'm going to grab the handles on the bottom and I'm going to start to really crank them. And you can see it's becoming a floor, but I'm still going to crank these out. This is why I'm on the pasteboard here. You need an extreme distortion of this to make this your floor. So in my case, if you want the same one that I have got, you need to put in these values. Do not try to put in these values. Simply drag the shit out of that. Remember, it's a smart object. This will be a non-destructive transform that you can go back in and modify again later. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK to that to actually accept it. I'm going to turn my figure back on. I'm going to double click on the hand to zoom back in, and now I've got something that does resemble a floor. Look at the converging lines on this. They are no longer flat up and down square. They are now a floor, but the floor would not be here. The floor would actually be underneath. It would be much lower down. So I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm simply going to drag this down. So the more I drag this down, the closer she gets to the background wall. The less I drag it down, the further away from the background wall that she is. Does this make sense? Are we good on this part? All right, one final thing, because I've got time to do it. Perfect. One final thing that we've got in here that is actually a problem for me, and that is depth of field. We have no depth of field in this. So to create the depth of field, the first thing I'm going to do is turn off the figure eyeball, turn off the floor eyeball, and select the top layer of my background. I need to make a single layer of all of my background in order to blur everything. If I try to blur just the wallpaper right now, the paint won't be blurred. I need a composite of I need a final single layer that represents my entire background. So with both of the figure off and the floor off, I'm selecting my top layer, hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. We've gone over this keyboard shortcut before. I told you were going to use it forever. You're going to use it forever. So again, selecting the top layer because it puts the merge stamp version above whatever layer is active. So select the top layer of this, turn off the figure and the floor because you don't want them to be part of this background layer. Hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E, and you will end up with this. This is now going to become a smart object. Layer, smart object, convert to smart object. And then I'm simply going to run a blur filter on it. So I'm going to turn my figure back on and my floor both back on. And I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit so I can get some sense of what I think this should look like. Again, the closer she is to the background, the sharper the wall will be. The further away from the background, the softer the wall will be. So you need to take that into consideration. I'm just going to blur it slightly from where she is right now for me. So up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And a 4 is like way too strong, so I'm going to crank this back down to probably like a 1 or a 2, somewhere in there. I'm going to use my preview check mark to turn this on and off. And I can probably hit that a little bit harder. I'm going to go up to like a 1.5. And I'm going to say, okay, remember, it's a smart object. I can always go back and change this. So again, it's a smart filter. I just double click on the smart filter and go right back in and change it. But now I need to do the floor. And the problem with the floor is that the floor should be sharp underneath the girl, but it should be soft in front of the girl, and it should also be soft in the background, right? Depth of field. It should be sharp right under her, but then as you start to move to the background, softening. But as you start to move from her towards the camera, it should also be softened, correct? So this is how you do it. I'm going to go up to the top to my floor layer right now, and I am going to, again, it is already a smart object. I've got a guideline on here. It's giving me all these guidelines. I got to figure out how to turn that shit off, because that was my whole move tool problem here as well, and it still is the move tool problem. But nonetheless, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to hit this with a really serious blur first, because I want to be able to preview the mask that I build for this. So come up to your filter, make sure that you do have the floor selected, up to your filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and we're going to smack this pretty hard. I'm going to crank it way out of proportion. So I'm going to hit it with like 20, maybe a little too strong. So like a 10, yeah, let's do a 10 or 10 or 12 pixels, somewhere in there. That'll be fine, whatever. And I'm just going to say okay to this. But now remember, what we've got on this is we've got a smart filter on this that has got that blur on it. I can use that to control where I really see this part happening. Now, people will come in sometimes and they will just paint a layer underneath this to show you where it actually should be sharp. So again, you could do this. If you hit a brush key, get a B key, make it a soft brush. Change your blending mode back to normal. 100% opacity, all the way up to 100% flow. Make it a little bit larger so it feels like what would be underneath her. I'm going to spot an area on my left-hand side right here. Again, this is my brush. Make sure that you are working on the smart filter mask, so make sure that that is active and selected. Black is going to be my foreground color. To hide the blur, I'm simply going to click on this spot right here. You can see that it actually got much sharper. Do not drag across. Come all the way over to the other side, hold down your shift key and click, and it will do a streak across your mask that will actually give you this area for her that should be, in focus. So if we take a look at the layer mask, hold down your option key, click on it, this is what we just painted. So again, that's what's hiding the blur. That's one way of doing this, and then simply open up your Gaussian blur, and then drop the blur back down now to the point where the backgrounds match. You need the blur on the very background of the floor to match the one on the background part. And around a 3, 4, somewhere in there looks correct for me. That's one way of doing your layer mask. Not your layer mask, your smart filter mask. Did that make sense to everyone? I'm going to show you the last way of doing it. Again, I'm going to go back to the really serious, I'm going to hit cancel. So I've got the really strong blur on there. It just helps to be able to see where this is happening. And instead of doing that thing that I just drug across that, I'm going to go to the gradient tool. You could hit the G key to get to the gradient tool. Up in the top menu up in here, click on your drop-down menu and say you want this to be a classic gradient. Then in the drop-down menu here, open up your basics. We are going to do foreground to background, but you can see I've got yellow as my background color. I don't want to fuck with actually changing that, so I'm just going to hit this basic, which is always black to white. That's what I actually want in here. But then I'm not going to do a linear gradient here. Instead, I'm going to do a reflected gradient right here. So what this reflected gradient does is it goes foreground to background to foreground. And you'll see it happen on this smart filter. I'm going to get rid of the content that's in this. I've just selected my smart filter mask again. White is my background color, so Command Delete will fill that with white. And then I'm simply going to pull a gradient. So I'm going to start here close to her, sort of back behind her. I'm going to click and drag down so it's a little bit in front of her. And you can see again, if you hold down your option key and click on this, that's the gradient that put down. It went from background to foreground to background. That's what a gradient, a reflected gradient actually does. But it's in the wrong place. If you take a look at this again, and you take a look at this, it's behind her. So instead, every time you pull a gradient, it will overwrite the old gradient. So I'm simply going to start closer to her feet and drag out. Make sure that you're working on the smart filter mask, not on the image. I'm going to click and simply drag forward here. And that pushed it forward a little bit more. I'm going to increase my blur so I can really see where the sharpening is happening. And I'm going to click here even more, again, on my smart filter mask, and push this a little bit more in front. And that looks like a gradient that is now falling directly underneath her. Again, if you want to see what it looks like, hold down your option key and click. This is what we did. Not very different than the painted one, but different enough. Double click on the Gaussian blur to re-edit it and crank it back down again, probably in that 3 or 4 range. You're really looking for the background floor to match up with the background, and that's how I would do it. And simply say, okay, add shadows, do your color balancing, and you're off to the races. And I finished exactly on time. I know. Questions about this? Are we good? Okay. Guys, have a great, no, it's not really a break, but I'll see you in 2 weeks, and we'll soldier on.
Quick question.
Yes.
How did you condense layers for your normally?
How did I do what?
Condense layers because you got the mask and then the background.
How did I make this the composite background layer for everyone? Yeah, hang on one second. Let me just stop the recording. I'll show you.